Pretend to be my wife." The whisper hit her ear like a struck match, low urgent, meant only for her. Evelyn Carter had never seen this man before in her life. But Grant Holloway was already smiling that wolf smile, already moving closer, already certain she had nowhere to run. She had $32, no room, no name left worth protecting. The stranger's hand was steady on her arm. His eyes said nothing except, "I will not let him touch you." One breath. "All right," she said. "Husband." And the cowboy who had sworn never to love again made the worst mistake of his careful guarded life. Before we go any further, if you love stories about courage, second chances, and love that sneaks up on you when you're not looking, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Montana Territory. Summer of 1886. Evelyn Carter arrived in Red Hollow on a Tuesday afternoon with $32 in her coat pocket, a worn leather suitcase, and a name that had already traveled ahead of her, and not in any way she would have chosen. She stepped off the stagecoach and stood in the middle of a dirt road, and for exactly 3 seconds, she allowed herself to believe that things might be different here. Then the woman at the post office saw her face. Then the woman read the name on the letter Evelyn handed over. Then the woman's expression went from neutral to closed, the way a window shuts just before a storm. "Evelyn Carter," the woman said, not as a greeting, more like a verdict. "That's right," Evelyn said, keeping her voice even. "From Missouri." "Yes." The woman slid the letter back across the counter without opening it. "The teaching position has been filled." Evelyn blinked. "I received written confirmation 3 weeks ago. I have the letter right here." "Filled?" the woman repeated. "Last week. I'm sorry." She didn't sound sorry at all. Evelyn picked up her letter, folded it carefully, and placed it back in her coat pocket. Her hands were steady. She had learned over the past 8 months how to keep her hands steady, even when everything else inside her was shaking. "Can you recommend a boarding house?" she asked. The woman hesitated just long enough to answer without actually answering. "Mrs. Darby's place is on the north end of town." Evelyn thanked her and walked out. Mrs. Darby's place turned out to be a clean, modest boarding house with window boxes full of geraniums and a hand-painted sign that read "Clean Rooms." "Respectable guests only." Evelyn knocked. A round-faced woman answered, took one long look at her, and said, "We're full up." "I see," Evelyn said. "Is there another boarding house in town?" "Henderson's, maybe, down past the livery." Henderson's had a vacancy, but no interest in filling it with her. The man at the door didn't even pretend to have a reason. He just shook his head and closed the door slowly, like he was giving her a chance to leave on her own terms. She did. By 4 o'clock, Evelyn had walked the full length of Red Hollow twice. She had been turned away from 2 boarding houses, informed that the teaching post was gone, and looked through by most of the townspeople she passed like she was made of glass. Colored glass, the kind that changes the light but isn't worth looking at directly. She sat down on the bench outside Harmon's General Store and allowed herself exactly 1 minute to feel sorry for herself. 1 minute. She had a rule about that. The problem was that she understood exactly what was happening, and understanding it didn't make it any less heavy to carry. Word had traveled west before she did. It always did when the man doing the talking was wealthy and well-connected and furious at having been told no. His name was Douglas Hale. He had been a merchant in Jefferson City, respected, prominent, the kind of man who got invited to every dinner and never had to introduce himself. He had decided about 14 months ago that Evelyn Carter would make him an excellent wife. Evelyn had decided otherwise. She had done it quietly, respectfully, and twice. The first time he had smiled and told her she'd come around. The second time he had stopped smiling. After the third refusal, he had started talking. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could be directly challenged. Just small things dropped into conversations at church socials and town meetings and ladies' auxiliaries. Small things that accumulated the way snow does, each flake harmless on its own, until suddenly you couldn't see the road anymore. A woman with strange ideas about her place. Not the most reliable character. Caused some trouble before she left. Best to be careful. She had tried to stay. She had tried to outlast it. But a woman's truth, she had learned, mattered far less than a powerful man's whisper. So she had taken what little she had and started moving west, chasing a teaching post in a place where her name hadn't arrived yet. Except it had. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and made herself breathe slowly. She had $29 left. She had a suitcase. She had a letter of recommendation from a minister in Missouri who had known her for 11 years and would speak for her character to anyone who asked, but no one was asking. She was 27 years old. She was sitting on a bench in a frontier town that had already decided what kind of woman she was, and she had approximately nowhere to go. The minute was up. She straightened her back, picked up her suitcase, and stood. That was when she saw Grant Holloway for the first time. He was coming out of the land office across the street, a tall, broad man in his mid-40s dressed in clothes that cost more than most men in Red Hollow made in a month. He had the kind of face that was handsome in a way that it knew about and used strategically. He moved through the street like someone who had already decided the space belonged to him. He glanced at her the way men like that glance at women who are standing alone with a suitcase in a strange town. Something in her stomach tightened. She picked up her bag and turned toward the south end of town, moving with purpose she didn't quite feel. She heard his footsteps change direction. She kept walking. "Miss." His voice was pleasant. The pleasant voice was the part that frightened her most because she recognized it. Douglas Hale had a pleasant voice too. "Miss, you look like you might need some help." "I'm fine, thank you," she said without stopping. "Now that suitcase looks heavy." "It isn't. Are you looking for a place to stay?" He had moved to walk beside her, matching her pace easily. "Because Red Hollow can be a hard town for a woman traveling alone, but I know a few people who might be willing to help." She stopped. She turned to look at him directly, because she had found that sometimes directness was a more effective barrier than politeness, and she needed whatever barriers she could get. "I appreciate the offer," she said, "but I can manage on my own." His smile didn't change. "Can you?" He let the question sit there between them, and what it actually meant was, "I already know you can't." She knew this kind of conversation. She knew where it led. She took a step back, and her heel caught on a loose board in the sidewalk, and she stumbled not far, but enough to unbalance her, and she braced for the embarrassment of it, and instead felt a hand close around her arm from the other side. Steady, firm, not grabbing, just catching. "Careful." She turned. The man standing beside her was someone she had never seen before in her life. Tall, genuinely tall, not the kind of tall that comes from boots and posture. Dark hair, a few days of stubble, sun-darkened skin, and eyes the color of riverstone in low light. He was wearing a working man's clothes, worn but clean, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, like he was calculating something quickly and had nearly finished. Then he looked up at Grant Holloway, and something in his jaw set. "Holloway," he said. The word contained no greeting. Grant's pleasant expression flickered just slightly. "Stone." The man standing beside Evelyn kept his hand on her arm lightly now, just present, and looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was a question, and beneath the question, something that might have been an offer. He said it quietly, barely above the noise of the street. "Pretend to be my wife." Her first instinct was to step back from both of them. Her second instinct, the instinct that had been sharpened by 8 months of understanding exactly how little protection a woman alone had in a world run by men like Grant Holloway and Douglas Hale, was to stay very still and think fast. "What?" she said, keeping her voice low. "Just for right now," he said. "Just for long enough." Long enough for what? He glanced toward Holloway. "Men like him respect what they fear, and they fear what belongs to someone else." She looked at Grant Holloway. She looked at the smile that hadn't entirely left his face, and the calculation behind his eyes, and the particular quality of his patience, the patience of a man who believed time was always on his side. She looked at the stranger beside her. She didn't know his name. She didn't know anything about him. All she knew was that his hand had steadied her when she stumbled, and that he had inserted himself between her and a man she didn't trust, and that whatever he was proposing, he wasn't proposing it the way Grant Holloway proposed things. She made a decision the way you make decisions when all your good options are already gone. She squared her shoulders. She breathed once. She turned toward Grant Holloway with an expression she had carefully constructed over the last 8 months, the one that said she was exactly as unbothered as she needed to appear. "Thank you for your concern," she told Grant pleasantly. "But my husband has arrived." She felt the man beside her go very slightly still, just for a beat, like he hadn't expected her to agree so fast. Then he shifted his weight and stepped forward, the way a man steps forward when he is establishing the boundary of a space he considers his own. "Holloway," he said again, "I'll remind you that my wife has just arrived after a long trip, and she could use some quiet." Grant Holloway looked between them. Something moved behind his eyes' assessment recalibration. "Stone," he said finally. "Didn't know you'd gotten married. There's a good deal you don't know about me," the man called Stone said. "That's how I prefer it." Another long moment. Then Grant smiled the smile that costs nothing and means less, and tipped his hat in Evelyn's direction. "Mrs. Stone," he said, "welcome to Red Hollow." He walked away. Evelyn stood very still and listened to his footsteps recede. Then she let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like several minutes. The man beside her, Stone, released her arm and took a half-step back, putting appropriate distance between them, with the efficiency of someone who had just remembered that they were standing next to a complete stranger. "I apologize," he said, "for the presumption." She turned to look at him. "Do you?" she said. He seemed to consider that. The situation seemed to require it. "It did," she agreed. "I'm not objecting. I'm asking if you actually feel sorry." Something shifted in his expression, not quite humor, but adjacent to it. "No," he admitted. "Not particularly." "Good," Evelyn said. "Neither am I." She shifted her suitcase from one hand to the other. "Evelyn Carter." He looked at her hand for a moment, then took it. "Caleb Stone." "Mr. Stone." She paused. "Is the name real or did you borrow it for the occasion?" "It's real." "And the wife?" "That part," he said, "we'll need to discuss." They discussed it at the far end of Harmon's General Store, at a small table near the back window, with 2 cups of coffee that the owner's wife brought without being asked and without making eye contact with either of them. Caleb Stone sat across from her with his hat on the table beside him and his hands wrapped around his cup, and Evelyn Carter sat across from him and watched him think. He was not. She had already noted a man who filled silences for the sake of filling them. He appeared to be constructing something in his mind before he said it, the way a builder measures twice before cutting. "The situation with Holloway isn't going to resolve itself tonight," he said finally. "No," she agreed. "Men like that don't lose interest when the obstacle goes away. They become more curious." He looked at her with something that might have been mild surprise, like she had confirmed a calculation he'd already run. "That's right. You know him." "I know his type," Caleb said. "And I've had some dealings with Holloway specifically. He's been trying to acquire land on the western edge of the valley for 2 years. He's patient, and he's persistent, and he doesn't mind using whatever he has available to get what he wants." "Including a woman alone with nowhere to stay?" "Yes." He said it without softening it, which she appreciated. "What are you proposing exactly?" He turned his cup in a slow half-circle. "My ranch is 12 miles northwest. I have a spare room. You could stay there while you work out a more permanent situation." He paused. "We would continue the arrangement from tonight. Let people assume we're married. It would give you protection and give me—" He stopped. "Give you what?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Holloway has been pressuring me regarding some land boundaries. A married man with an established household is harder to dismiss than a man living alone. It gives me standing." She considered that. "You need the appearance of a stable life." I need him to stop believing I'm isolated enough to be pushed around, Caleb said, which amounts to the same thing. For how long? Until you find your footing. And until the situation with Holloway resolves. He met her eyes. A few weeks, perhaps. A month at most. Evelyn looked down at her coffee. She thought about Mrs. Darby's boarding house, with its window boxes and its closed door. She thought about $29 and no teaching post and a name that had traveled further west than she had expected it to. She thought about Grant Holloway's smile. She looked up. I have conditions, she said. Something in his expression shifted, not displeasure exactly. More like he was recalibrating for an outcome he hadn't fully anticipated. All right. I earn my keep. I won't be housed in exchange for nothing. If I'm staying at your ranch, I'll contribute to it. That's not necessary. It is to me, she said. That's the condition. He considered. Fine. And I won't be lied to. If there are things about this arrangement or about your situation that I need to know, you tell me directly. I can agree to that. And when this is over, she said, it's over cleanly. No complications. No obligations in either direction. He held her gaze for a long moment. You've done something like this before. What? Made an arrangement with clear terms to protect yourself from something harder to handle. She kept her expression steady. I've had to make do with what was available. So have I, he said quietly. They looked at each other across the small table. Two people who had each in their own ways learned that the world was better navigated with clear rules than with hope. Then we have an agreement, Evelyn said. Caleb picked up his hat. We leave at dawn. The ride to Stone Ranch the next morning was 12 miles of Montana that did not care at all about Evelyn Carter's opinions of it, sweeping and enormous and indifferent, in the way the West was always indifferent, the land going on in every direction past any point the eye could settle on. Caleb Stone sat beside her on the wagon seat and said very little, which she found unexpectedly to be a relief. She had spent 8 months in the company of people who either said too much with the intention of managing her or said too little with the intention of making her feel small. Silence that wasn't being used as a weapon was something she had almost forgotten about. She watched the land go by and thought about what she was doing. She was traveling with a stranger to his property on the basis of an agreement made over bad coffee in the back of a general store to pretend to be married to a man she had met approximately 14 hours ago. When she laid it out like that, she understood exactly how it sounded. She also understood that she had exactly $29, no post, no room, and a name that seemed to precede her like a very specific kind of weather. And she had seen Grant Holloway's eyes. She had weighed the options available to her and made the most reasonable choice among them. That was not desperation. That was arithmetic. They arrived at Stone Ranch just after 8 in the morning, and the first thing Evelyn saw was the size of it. She had expected a working ranch, something functional, managed, probably a bit rough. She had not expected this. The land was extensive and well kept. The cattle she could see in the distance numbered in what must have been the hundreds. The barn was large and recently repaired, and the house itself was solid and well built, a proper structure with a covered porch and real glass windows. What she had not expected was the silence of it, not the silence of emptiness. There were ranch hands moving about, and she could hear cattle and horses and the ordinary sounds of a working operation. But the house itself sat in the center of all that activity, like something that had decided a long time ago not to be involved. The porch had chairs on it, but they looked like they hadn't been moved in months. The windows were clean, but the curtains were plain and functional, and had clearly been chosen by someone who was not thinking about what they looked like. There was a kitchen garden at the side of the house that had gone partly to seed at one end, not abandoned, but not tended with any particular care. Caleb Stone had built a life here, a successful, well-ordered, functional life, and he had built it so that nothing in it required him to feel anything. She said none of this. She stepped down from the wagon, picked up her bag, and said, "Where would you like me to start?" He looked at her like the question had surprised him. "Start." "I told you I'd earn my keep," she said. "What does this place need?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'll show you the house first." The house was as she had seen it from outside, clean, organized, and stripped of anything that might be called warmth. The kitchen had supplies, but no system. The sitting room had furniture, but no arrangement that suggested anyone actually sat there for pleasure. The spare room he showed her was clean and had a good bed, but the walls were bare, and the single window looked out on the side yard and had no curtain. "It'll do fine," she said, "because it would. There's a woman who comes twice a week to do laundry," Caleb said. "And I have a cook 3 days." "I can cook," Evelyn said, "if that's helpful." He stopped. "You don't have to—" "Mr. Stone." She said his name with enough quiet precision that he stopped talking. "I am a practical person. You have a house that could function better with someone managing it. I have time and skills and a need to be useful. That's not charity. That's an exchange." She paused. "You said I could." He looked at her for a long moment, with that unreadable expression she was beginning to associate with him thinking faster than he was speaking. "The accounts are in the study," he said. "They're behind by about 3 weeks. I'll start there this afternoon," she said. "And the kitchen. I'll look at what you have and figure out supper by 5. He was still looking at her. "You're very decisive for someone who arrived with one suitcase and nowhere to go." "Yes," she said. "I find it's more efficient." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Something closer to it than she had seen from him yet. "I'll introduce you to the hands at midday," he said. She nodded and set her suitcase down and began unpacking what she needed, and that was how it began. Yet, the ranch hands were not sure what to make of her. There were 6 of them, 5 men ranging in age from 19 to 50-something, and one woman, a wiry, dark-haired Mexican woman named Rosa, who was in her 30s and managed the household functions with efficient authority, and did not appear interested in forming opinions about Evelyn until she had gathered sufficient evidence. The oldest of the men, a weathered Texan named Ed, who had the air of someone who had worked this land since before Caleb owned it, shook her hand and said, "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Stone," in a voice that indicated he was reserving judgment. A younger man named Billy, who could not have been more than 22, shook her hand twice by accident and turned red and said, "Welcome," so enthusiastically that it made the man beside him roll his eyes. Caleb introduced her simply. "This is Evelyn. She'll be managing the household." He didn't offer more explanation than that, and the hands who apparently knew how to read their employer didn't ask for it. Rosa asked that evening while Evelyn was learning the kitchen, "How long have you and Mr. Stone been married?" Evelyn measured out flour without hesitating. "Not long," she said. "We're still getting acquainted." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "He is a private man." "I noticed that. He has been alone here a long time." Evelyn looked up. Rosa was watching her with a direct, evaluating gaze that held no particular warmth, but also no hostility, just assessment. The look of a person deciding whether to extend credit. "I imagine that suits him," Evelyn said. "It does," Rosa said. "Whether it's good for him is a different question." She turned back to the dishes. "Supper smells good." It was not exactly a welcome, but it was something. Dermied. The first week established a pattern. Caleb left before sunrise and returned at dusk, and in the hours between Evelyn systematically went through the house and found every place where small neglect had compounded into real disorder. The accounts were exactly as behind as he'd said 3 weeks of unfiled receipts and incomplete ledger entries, which she resolved in an afternoon and a half. She reorganized the kitchen by function, put the staples in order, and created a rotation that made it possible to cook without standing in front of every cabinet, wondering what was where. She inventoried the household supplies and found 3 things they were almost out of, 2 things they had far too much of, and 1 thing that Caleb had apparently been ordering in exactly the wrong quantity for what seemed like several years. She didn't say anything about it. She just adjusted the order and noted it in the ledger. She repaired the kitchen garden at the side of the house because it bothered her to see things going to seed when they didn't have to. She worked for 2 mornings getting it back into order, and no one said anything about it, but she noticed that Caleb looked at it when he came in from the far pasture on the 3rd day and paused in a way that wasn't quite a stop. She treated the ranch hands the way she would have treated any person she encountered, as people deserving of ordinary courtesy. She learned their names and used them. She remembered that Billy took his coffee without sugar and that Ed had a bad knee that made the porch steps difficult on cold mornings. And she didn't make any display of knowing these things, she just adjusted for them quietly. Billy began leaving her small offerings a particularly nice piece of firewood, a bucket of water set on the porch, before she needed it, with the blushing transparency of someone who didn't know how to express appreciation, but felt strongly compelled to express it. Ed began repairing the fence section nearest the house that had apparently needed attention for months. Rosa began telling her things about the ranch where supplies were kept, which vendors were reliable, what Caleb preferred, and what he merely tolerated in the manner of someone who has decided that a person is competent enough to be trusted with real information. Caleb Stone himself remained more difficult to read. He was not unkind. He was not cold exactly. He was present in the house in the way that a well-built wall is present, substantial, solid, and clearly constructed with considerable purpose. He asked about the accounts each evening and listened to what she told him with genuine attention. He answered her questions about the ranch operation directly and with more detail than she expected. He ate her cooking with evident appreciation, even if his expressions of that appreciation were limited to things like, "This is good," and "better than what I've been doing," both of which she accepted as the high praise they were in context. But he kept distance with the same consistency and care with which he kept everything else on this ranch. She understood it. She didn't push it. She had her own walls. She had built them for good reasons and didn't see the point in criticizing someone else's architecture. It was Rosa who told her about the woman, not deliberately, or maybe not entirely unintentionally. They were in the kitchen on a Thursday evening, and Evelyn had asked about the photograph she had noticed on the study mantel, a formal portrait, a woman in her late 20s, handsome and composed. Rosa's expression shifted slightly. "That is Sarah," she said. "Who is Sarah? A woman from before?" Rosa was quiet for a moment, organizing something in the cabinet. "She was here for almost a year. Mr. Stone was—" She paused, choosing words carefully. He was not himself in those days, not so closed. He was making plans. And then she left. She went to Billings with a businessman, a man who owned a large house and didn't smell like cattle. Rosa closed the cabinet door with a soft click. He didn't speak for 3 days afterward. Then he went back to work, and he has not stopped since. Evelyn absorbed this in silence. When was that? 5 years ago. 5 years of getting up before sunrise and working until dark and building an empire of space around himself that nothing could breach. 5 years of making sure the ranch ran perfectly and the accounts were straight and everything was in its correct place, and never once asking for anything that required someone else to stay. She thought about her first impression of this house. The chairs on the porch that no one sat in. The curtains chosen for function and not beauty. The kitchen garden that had been going to seed. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "I'm not telling you for any particular reason," Rosa said, in a tone that suggested the exact opposite. On the 9th day, Grant Holloway came to the ranch. He came in the mid-morning when Caleb was out with the cattle and Evelyn was on the porch with the account ledger. She saw him coming up the road from a distance and had time to set the ledger down and arrange herself before he arrived. He rode up and stopped at the fence line, which was as far as the gate permitted, without an invitation. "Mrs. Stone?" he said pleasantly. "Mr. Holloway," she said. "What can I do for you? I was hoping to speak with your husband." "He's working," Evelyn said, "as he is most mornings. If you leave a message, I'll let him know you called." Holloway smiled. He had that smile like a door that opens slightly but shows you nothing of what's inside the room. "Actually, I was hoping to get better acquainted with you as well. We didn't really have the chance when you arrived." "No," Evelyn said. We didn't. How are you finding Red Hollow? Very pleasant. And the ranch must be an adjustment coming from... He paused just long enough to indicate that the pause was deliberate. Missouri, I believe. Everything adjusts in time, she said pleasantly. He looked at her with those calculating eyes that were always working behind the smile. I imagine Caleb Stone wasn't easy to know at first. He's not known for being particularly approachable. I find him approachable, Evelyn said. Do you? It wasn't a question. Funny, most people don't. Then most people haven't known him well enough, she said. She held his gaze steadily. Is there something specific I can help you with, Mr. Holloway? I have a great deal to get through this morning. He sat back slightly, and the smile took on a different quality. Not colder exactly, but reoriented. Of course, he said, just being neighborly. He touched his hat. Tell Caleb I'll see him in town. He turned and rode back down the road. Evelyn watched him go. Then she picked up the ledger and tried to remember where she had been. She told Caleb about the visit that evening at supper. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he set down his fork and said, What did you make of him? He came to assess me, she said. He's wondering how real this is. And he's uncertain, which is good. She paused. He's going to keep testing it. Caleb was quiet for a moment. He's been trying to acquire land on the western boundary for 2 years. My land is part of a larger block he wants assembled before the railroad survey comes through. He looked at his plate. He's been waiting for me to have a bad year, or a distraction. He thinks a wife might be a distraction. He thinks any change to a man's situation might create an opening. He paused. He's not wrong as a general matter. She looked at him. But not in this case. Something moved in his expression. Not in this case, he said. They finished supper in the comfortable silence that had begun over the past 9 days to feel less like emptiness and more like a shared space they had stopped needing to fill. The letter arrived on the Wednesday in Caleb's name official and sealed with the county land office's mark. Evelyn brought it to him when he came in from the morning work and watched his expression as he read it. The neutrality of his face when he was reading things that concerned him was remarkable, like watching a man walk calmly across ice. You could see the care in the stillness. He set the letter on the table. There's a dispute being filed on the western boundary, he said. Holloway is claiming the survey markers were incorrectly placed when my father purchased the land. Evelyn looked at the letter. Can he do that? He can claim it. He'll need evidence. He was quiet for a moment. There are documents that establish the original survey. My father kept everything. They're in the study. Then the claim fails, if the documents are intact. He looked at her directly. I haven't gone through all my father's papers. He kept extensive records, but they haven't been properly organized. If something is missing, then we need to go through them, Evelyn said. He looked at her. That would take several days. Then we better start this evening, she said. May I help? Something happened in his expression, then something that was not quite the same careful neutrality she had been studying for 9 days. Something that was perhaps the first small crack in the architecture. Yes, he said after a moment that felt longer than it probably was. I'd appreciate that. They worked through Jedediah Stone's papers for 4 evenings, sitting at opposite ends of the study table with documents spread between them, and this was how Evelyn learned what Caleb Stone was when he thought no one was paying particularly close attention. He was meticulous. Every document he reviewed was read fully organized into a category and stacked with the careful precision of someone who believed that carelessness was a form of disrespect. He didn't hurry even when she could see he was tired. He was also underneath the stillness, deeply attached to this land in a way that he never said directly, but that was visible in the way he handled his father's papers. He would stop sometimes on a survey map or a record of a cattle purchase, and his expression would go somewhere private, and then he would come back and continue. But she had seen where he'd gone. This ranch was not just property to him. It was the thing he had built his whole remaining self around. She filed this away and said nothing. On the third evening, they found the original survey documentation. It was complete, clear, and definitively established the boundary lines in a way that made Holloway's claim look exactly like what it was, a harassment strategy. Caleb set down the final document and said, "That's it." "Yes," Evelyn said. "He has no case." "He knew he had no case," Caleb said. "This was never about the land records. He's trying to create uncertainty, make me spend money on lawyers, make me distracted." He paused. "Make me feel vulnerable." "Why does he think that would work?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He looked at the organized stacks of his father's papers, testimony of a life spent building something, and he was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because I've been alone out here for 5 years, and a man alone can be made to feel like he has something to lose." The room was very quiet. "But you're not alone," Evelyn said. She kept her voice even, stating a fact rather than making a declaration of anything. He looked at her. "No," he said slowly. "Right now, I'm not." And something in the air between them shifted. Not dramatically, not in any way that could be named or pointed to, but shifted nonetheless, the way a room's quality changes when someone opens a window and a different kind of light comes in. Neither of them mentioned it. They organized the last of the papers and said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, and if either of them lay awake afterward, thinking about a quality of light that hadn't been there before, that was their own private business. But Evelyn Carter, who had made a careful rule about keeping things clean and uncomplicated, and entirely devoid of the particular kind of hope that had always cost her the most, lay in her good bed in the spare room of Stone Ranch and looked at the plain ceiling and was aware very specifically that something had changed. She told herself it was the case with the land records, a problem identified and solved. She almost believed it. The knock on her door came at 2 in the morning. It was Rosa, which startled her because Rosa was not a person who knocked on doors in the middle of the night. "Someone's been at the cattle," Rosa said. Evelyn pulled on her coat and followed her outside. 2 of the hands were already there. The south pasture fence had been cut cleanly, deliberately, not broken by accident. 6 cattle were scattered, moving in the wrong direction in the dark. Ed appeared at her elbow. "Someone who knew what they were doing," he said quietly. "This wasn't random. That's the section we moved the best of the herd to last week." "Where's Mr. Stone?" "Already out there." Ed nodded toward the dark. He heard them. Evelyn looked at the cut fence, at the clean edges of the wire. This wasn't a land records dispute. This was someone who had decided to apply pressure in a different way. She helped organize the recovery of the scattered cattle and didn't go back inside until just before dawn, when all 6 had been found and the fence had been temporarily mended and the hands were setting up a watch rotation. Caleb came back to the house as the sky was beginning to lighten. He was dirty and tired, and his jaw was set in a way she had come to recognize as the specific expression of a man who is keeping something carefully controlled. He looked at her standing on the porch in her coat. "You didn't have to stay up," he said. "I was part of it," she said simply. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her in the early gray light. "Evelyn," he said, and the way he said her name quietly, and like it was a word he was trying for the first time, made something catch in her chest that she had no intention of examining. "What?" He looked like he was going to say several things and had decided against them all. "Thank you," he said finally, "for everything you've done here." It was not, she told herself later, a declaration of anything. It was gratitude. Practical gratitude from a man who was not demonstrative with any of his emotions. She told herself that. She went inside, and she did not think about the quality of the light. She thought instead about cut fence wire and deliberate damage, and a man named Grant Holloway, who had decided that Caleb Stone needed to feel the cost of saying no. Because she understood suddenly that the arrangement she had agreed to, the clean, practical, temporary arrangement with clear terms and no complications, had become something she had not planned for. Not because her feelings had changed. Or not only because of that, But because she was standing in the dawn light on the porch of a ranch that had started without her permission to feel like a place that mattered to her, and the man who had come home dirty and tired from defending it had said her name like it was real. And Grant Holloway was going to keep coming. She understood that with absolute clarity. The question was what she was going to do about it. They rode into Red Hollow at 4 in the afternoon, and the town knew they were coming before they arrived. Evelyn could feel it, the quality of the attention on the main street when the wagon turned in, the way people stopped what they were doing and watched with the particular stillness of a community that has been given something to look at and has not yet decided what to think about it. A woman at the milliner's window. 2 men outside the feed store who stopped their conversation mid-word. A child who ran back inside a door. Grant Holloway had been busy. Caleb drove the wagon to the livery without changing his pace, without looking left or right, with the exact same unhurried steadiness he brought to everything. She matched it. She sat straight beside him and kept her eyes forward and her hands still, and she breathed, and she did not allow the weight of those watching eyes to show anywhere on her body. Ed was waiting at the livery. His face, usually weathered into a kind of leathery neutrality, was carrying something that looked very close to anger. "How bad?" Caleb said, climbing down. "Depends on what you mean by bad," Ed said. "The complaint Holloway filed is public record now. Sheriff Aldridge posted it this morning." He glanced at Evelyn briefly, not accusingly, just factually. "There are people in town who are talking." "The witness," Caleb said. "Who is he?" "Man named Prescott, Martin Prescott, says he's from Jefferson City, says he knew Mrs. Stone there." Ed paused. "He's been telling the story to anyone who'll stand still long enough. The gist of it is that the marriage isn't real, that the whole thing was arranged to deceive, and that Mrs. Stone has done this kind of thing before." Evelyn said Martin Prescott was Douglas Hale's business partner. Both men looked at her. "They co-owned a mercantile together for 6 years, she said. "Hale sent him. That's how this works. Holloway needed someone with a connection to my past, and Hale needed someone who could extend his reach out here. They found each other." She kept her voice level. "Where is Prescott now?" "Hotel," Ed said. "And Holloway." "Land office last I saw." Caleb looked at her. "What do you need?" She thought for exactly 3 seconds. "I need to talk to Prescott before Holloway gets to him again. And I need a witness to that conversation." She paused. "Not you. Someone the town trusts." Ed said, "Reverend Moore." "Yes," she said. "Can you get him?" "In 20 minutes, Ed said. He was already moving. Caleb looked at her with an expression that was, for the first time since she had known him, something close to uncertain. Not about her, she understood the distinction now. About the situation. About the specific kind of helplessness that comes when someone you trust is walking into something you cannot walk into for them. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I'm not alone," she said. "You're here." She held his gaze. "But this part I have to do myself. Because if you're with me when I confront Prescott, it looks like you're managing me. And that's the story Holloway wants people to see." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't like it." "I know," she said. "Wait for me with Ed." Martin Prescott was a pale, damp-looking man in his mid-50s who had the air of someone who had been comfortable most of his life and had recently been asked to do something that made him slightly less comfortable, and who was managing this by performing confidence. He was in the hotel dining room when Evelyn walked in with Reverend Moore beside her, and the performance flickered. "Miss Carter," he said, then recalibrating, "Mrs. Stone." "Mr. Prescott," she said. She sat down across from him without being invited. Reverend Moore took the chair beside her and folded his hands on the table, with the tranquil authority of a man who has spent decades being a reliable witness to difficult moments. "I appreciate you staying in town long enough for us to speak." Prescott looked at Moore. Something in his expression recalculated. "I wasn't expecting company." "No," she said. "I imagine you were expecting to be finished with this and back on a stage before I returned." She kept her voice pleasant. "What exactly did Douglas Hale offer you to come out here?" The color in Prescott's face shifted. "I don't know what you..." Mr. Prescott, she said, I've been a school teacher for 8 years. I know exactly what a person looks like when they're deciding whether a lie will hold. She paused. It won't, because everything you've said in this town is public record now, and if it can be shown to be false, you're liable for the damage. He blinked. I'm not here to threaten you, she said. I'm here to give you an opportunity to clarify what you told the sheriff. She leaned forward slightly. What did Hale actually tell you to say? Prescott looked at Moore. Moore looked back with the serene patience of a man who is in no hurry. He said you'd caused problems. Prescott said, his voice dropping, that you'd made trouble for him, that you had a pattern of attaching yourself to men of standing. And you believed him. He's my partner. He's a man who was refused 3 times by a woman who was his social inferior and chose to call it her misconduct rather than his. She said, You know Douglas Hale. You've known him for 6 years. Does that sound implausible to you? Silence. What he's asking you to do, she said more quietly, is damage a marriage, a real life in a territory you'll never live in for a man who pays your salary and whose word you've taken on something you have no actual knowledge of. She held his gaze. You have no direct knowledge of anything Douglas Hale told you. You know that. I know that. And now Reverend Moore knows that. Prescott looked at Moore again. Moore said gently, Is that accurate, Mr. Prescott? That you're repeating what you were told rather than what you witnessed directly? A long, uncomfortable silence. Yes, Prescott said finally. Quietly. Like something deflating. That's accurate. Would you be willing to put that in writing? Moore asked. Another silence. Then, yes, I suppose I would. Evelyn walked back to the livery, with the written statement folded in her coat pocket and Reverend Moore beside her, and she felt something that was not quite triumph. She was not built for triumph. She had found it was too close in temperature to relief, and relief always made her want to sit down, and she thought carefully about what came next, because this was not over. Prescott's recantation was significant, but it was one move, and Grant Holloway had been playing this board for 2 years, and had more pieces than one hired witness from Missouri. Caleb was waiting exactly where she had left him. He looked at her face first, then at Moore, then at the pocket where she had put the document. It's done, he asked. This part, she said. She gave him the statement. He read it in the attentive, complete way he read everything. When he finished, he looked up at Reverend Moore. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Moore said, and his tone had changed slightly. Something in it that was less pastoral and more direct. Holloway's not going to accept this quietly. He still has the complaint on file, the land dispute, and he has the ability to make this community's opinion of both of you his weapon. He looked at Caleb. The question isn't just what's true, it's what people choose to believe. What would help them choose correctly? Caleb asked. Moore looked at him. You've been a private man for a long time, Caleb. People respect you, but they don't know you. That makes it easier for someone to fill in the gaps with whatever story they want to tell. He paused. Let them know you, both of you, not performing genuinely. People in this valley are fundamentally decent. If they see what's actually in front of them, most of them will respond to it. Caleb was quiet for a moment. You're suggesting I what? Open the ranch, talk to people. I'm suggesting, Moore said, that you stop letting Grant Holloway be the most forthcoming person in every conversation about your life. That evening, back at Stone Ranch, they sat on the porch in the 2 chairs that had not been moved in months, and Caleb told her about Sarah. Not in a dramatic way. Not as a confession. The way he told things without preamble, beginning in the middle, like he trusted her to understand the context. Her name was Sarah Lennox, he said. She was from the East originally. She came out here with her brother's family, and I met her at a harvest gathering. He paused. I was 30. I hadn't been close to many people. I didn't know how to... He stopped. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that she made everything quieter. Evelyn watched the dark beyond the porch and said nothing. "We were together almost a year," he said. "I was making plans, the kind you make when you believe something is permanent." His jaw set. "She told me in March. A businessman from Billings, a man with a townhouse and a future that didn't require her to spend winters 12 miles from the nearest neighbor." He paused. "She said the ranch was beautiful, but it was lonely, and that she was lonely inside it." "Did she love you?" Evelyn asked. He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I think she cared for me. I don't think she was capable of what I was building toward." He paused. "Or maybe she was, and I didn't give her enough of what she needed to want to stay. I've never fully been able to determine which. Does it matter now?" "It mattered for a long time," he said. "Less than it did. More than it should probably." She looked at him. "What did you do afterward?" "Worked," he said simply. "That's what I know how to do." "I know," she said. "I've watched you do it." He turned to look at her. Do you mean that as a criticism?" "No," she said. "I mean it as recognition. I know what it looks like when someone pours everything they have into something that doesn't leave room for them to feel what they're afraid of feeling." She paused. "I've done it myself." He was quiet. "After Missouri," she said. "Every hour I wasn't teaching, I was organizing something, moving something, improving something, because if I stopped—" She paused. "If I stopped, I would have had to sit with the fact that I had done everything right, and it had still gone wrong, and I didn't know how to hold that." He looked at her for a long moment. "Do you know how to hold it now?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Better than I did," she said. "Not completely. That's about where I am," he said quietly. They sat with that for a while in the dark on the porch, with the chairs that had not been moved in months. The night was large and clear around them, and the cattle were quiet in the far pasture, and the ranch was still in the way. It was still at this hour, all its industry resting. "Caleb," she said. "What?" She looked at her hands. She was going to say something careful, something measured, something that respected the arrangement and its terms and the good reasons behind them. Instead, she said, "I don't want to leave when this is over." The silence afterward was absolute. She had not planned to say that. She had, in fact, spent 3 weeks, specifically, not saying that. But Prescott's face in the hotel dining room had done something to her, the sight of a man willing to destroy a real thing for a man who had never believed real things were worth protecting, and she had come home to this porch and this man who had told her about the weight he'd been carrying, and she had simply run out of room for the careful version. Caleb had not moved. "Evelyn," he said. "You don't have to," she started. "I don't want you to," he said. "Leave." He said it to the dark, not to her face, which she understood was the only way he could say it, and still say it. "I haven't wanted that for a while." The night waited. "But," he said. "I know," she said. "This started as—" "I know what it started as. And I need to be honest with you," he said, and now he turned and looked at her, and his face was doing that thing it did when the architecture came down, when it was just the man underneath, without the careful management of it. "I've been here before, with someone. I made plans, and I was wrong about what was real." "You weren't wrong about what was real," she said. "You were wrong about her. Those aren't the same thing." He looked at her. "What you felt was real," she said. "What you wanted was real. What she chose was her choice. Not a judgment on your ability to know the difference between real and pretend." He was very still. "I know the difference," she said quietly. "And I'm not pretending." He looked at her for a long time in the dark on the porch of a ranch that had started without either of their permissions to be something other than an arrangement. Then he reached across the space between the chairs and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it, held it. His thumb moved once across her knuckles with the same careful deliberateness he brought to everything. She didn't say anything, neither did he. They sat there in the dark and held on, and it was the simplest thing that had happened between them and the most significant. Grant Holloway's response to Prescott's recantation was fast and precise and exactly as ugly as she had expected. He came to the ranch the next morning. Not to the house he stopped at the fence line as he always did. But this time he brought two men with him that Evelyn didn't recognize, and the quality of his arrival was different. Less pleasant. Less patient. Caleb went to the fence. Evelyn stayed on the porch close enough to hear. "The complaint stands," Holloway said. "One man's statement doesn't change what I filed." "It changes what the sheriff can support," Caleb said. "His only witness has recanted. There are other witnesses." "Then produce them." Holloway's smile was thinner than usual. The pleasantness had been adjusted, recalibrated towards something that was still controlled, but no longer bothering with warmth. "Caleb, I've been patient with you. I've tried to handle this like neighbors." "You cut my fence," Caleb said. "That's not how neighbors behave." "I don't know anything about your fence." "You know exactly about my fence," Caleb said. "You've known exactly about everything that's happened on this property for 2 years. And you're going to keep knowing things and claiming you don't until you get what you want, which is my western boundary and whatever leverage comes with it." He paused. "But you're not going to get it. Not with the boundary dispute which the county records have already resolved. Not with Prescott, who has decided not to continue lying for you. And not with—" He stopped briefly, and something moved in his jaw. "Not with anything else you're planning." Holloway looked at him for a long moment, then looked at the porch, at Evelyn. "She's good," he said. "I'll give her that. Arrived with nothing, and had you completely turned around in a month." The pleasantness was almost entirely gone now, and what was underneath it was cooler and harder and more honest. "You're not the first man she's done this to." Caleb said, "Say what you want about me. Don't talk about my wife." "Your wife?" Holloway repeated with a particular emphasis that meant the opposite of acceptance. "Caleb, you've been alone out here since Stone left that woman 5 years ago. Everyone in this valley knows it, and then in 1 week this woman appears from nowhere, and you're suddenly married and defending her against everything I bring, and you honestly believe—" "What I believe," Caleb said, and his voice had gone to something very quiet and very final, the kind of quiet that is the opposite of softness, "is not your concern. What is your concern is that I have certified documentation from the county land office disproving your boundary claim, a signed statement from your own witness, disavowing everything he told the sheriff, and the patience to stand here as long as it takes." He paused. "How long do you want to do this?" Holloway looked at him. The two men behind him were still. The morning was very quiet. "This isn't over," Holloway said. "I know," Caleb said. "Come back when you have something real." Holloway turned and rode. Caleb walked back to the house, and Evelyn was already off the porch and meeting him halfway, and he looked at her with an expression that had the residue of something large and difficult, the aftermath of a man who had just held something together that had cost him. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said. Then, "No, not entirely." He looked at her. "He's going to find another way." "I know." "Whatever it is, it's going to be worse than anything so far, because he's running out of patience, and men like that, when they run out of patience, they get reckless," she said. "And reckless people make mistakes." He looked at her for a moment. "That's either very wise or very optimistic." "Can't it be both?" For a moment, just a moment, something eased in his face. Not quite a smile, but the possibility of one. "It can be both," he said. 3 days of quiet followed, which was the most alarming thing that had happened yet. Evelyn knew quiet. Quiet when a man like Holloway went quiet was not peace. It was preparation. She used the 3 days. She went to see Mr. Finch at the school board with Reverend Moore's introduction, and she sat across from a thin, skeptical man who had heard things about her and was trying to reconcile those things with the woman sitting in front of him. She let him ask what he needed to ask. She answered clearly. She brought her letters of recommendation, the one from the minister in Missouri, and 2 from parents of former students who had written without being asked, because sometimes people did things like that. She told Finch about the 40-year-old farmer and his grandson. When she finished, Finch was quiet for a moment. "The school board meets Tuesday," he said. "I can bring it to a vote." "I'd appreciate that," she said. "Mrs. Stone." He paused, looking at her over his glasses with an expression that was no longer skeptical, but wasn't entirely resolved either. "I'll be honest with you. There's been talk." "I know," she said. "There has been, and I'm asking you to weigh that talk against what's sitting in front of you and make a fair judgment." He looked at her for a long moment. "Tuesday," he said. She walked out into the afternoon sun and breathed, and then she walked to the sheriff's office. Aldridge was there going through papers with the deliberate pace of a man who has found that slow movement reduces the number of things that require immediate response. "I'd like to understand the status of the complaint Mr. Holloway filed," she said. Aldridge set down his papers. "It's on record, based on testimony from a witness who is now recanted in writing," she said. She placed Prescott's statement on his desk. "With a witness to the recantation." She placed Moore's signed confirmation beside it. "What does that mean for the complaint standing?" Aldridge looked at the documents. He picked them up. He read them with the same slow care he applied to everything. "It weakens it significantly," he said. "Does it remove it?" "Not automatically. Holloway filed it formally. It would need to be formally dismissed." "What would accomplish that?" Aldridge set the papers down and looked at her with the expression of a man who is deciding how much to say. "A finding that the complaint was filed without substantive basis, or a finding that the evidence offered was knowingly false." He paused. "If Prescott was paid to come out here and say what he said, and that can be demonstrated, then Holloway is liable for filing a fraudulent complaint," she said. "Potentially." He was very careful with that word. Potentially. She picked up her documents. "Thank you, Sheriff. Mrs. Stone." He said it the way Ed had said it the first time, neither warm nor cold, but with the particular weight of a man deciding whether something is real. She turned. "I grew up in this territory," he said. "I've known Caleb Stone's family 20 years. His father was the most honest man I ever met in this part of the country." She waited. "I'm not saying the apple doesn't fall far from the tree," Aldridge said carefully. "I'm just noting that I've known that family a long time, and I don't think Caleb Stone is a man who makes fool's decisions." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "He isn't." She walked back to the wagon with the documents and her thoughts, and she sat for a moment before picking up the reins, and she felt the shape of what was building, all the pieces that were accumulating, like the county survey documents and Prescott's statement and Aldridge's not-quite endorsement, the way a case builds not in one dramatic moment, but in the patient accumulation of real things. But she also felt the shape of what Holloway was building, and she knew with the certainty of someone who had seen men like this operate before that he hadn't finished yet. The twist came from a direction she had never considered. It came from Rosa. On a Wednesday evening, Rosa came to find her in the study. Not the kitchen, not the porch. The study, which meant she had looked for her in 2 places first, and she closed the door behind her, which was something Rosa had never done before. Evelyn put down the ledger. Rosa sat across from her and looked at her with those direct assessing eyes, and what was in them was something Evelyn had not seen there before. It was worry. "I need to tell you something," Rosa said. "And I need you to understand that I'm telling you because of what I believe, not because I'm certain." "All right," Evelyn said. "There is a man," Rosa said carefully. "He has been coming to the south pasture at night. Not the same man as before, different man. Charlie has seen him twice, Billy once." She paused. "He is not cutting fences. He is watching. Watching the house. Watching everything. The house, the barn, the road." She looked at Evelyn directly. "Watching you." Evelyn was very still. When did this start? 5 days ago, after Prescott left. Rosa's hands were flat on the desk, and she was not the kind of woman whose hands trembled, but they were pressing down slightly, which told Evelyn something. I think Holloway has changed what he's doing. I think he is not trying to take the land or ruin the marriage anymore. What is he trying to do? Rosa looked at her. I think he is looking for a way to make you afraid enough to leave. The room was very quiet. She thought about that for a moment, the specific calculation of it, the particular cruelty of it. Not attacking the land or the legal standing. Attacking the person. Making the environment feel so unsafe, so watched, so compromised, that the woman who had come from somewhere else would decide that leaving was better than staying. It was, she thought, what he would have done from the beginning if he had understood her correctly. He had spent weeks treating her as a variable in Caleb's situation rather than as a person with her own capability and her own stubbornness. He had made the same mistake Douglas Hale had made. He thought that sufficiently applied pressure would make her choose the easier path. He didn't understand that she had already been on the easier path, and it had led her here, and she had decided she preferred here. Tell Caleb, she said. I wanted to tell you first, Rosa said, because it is you he's watching, and you deserve to decide how it is told. She looked at Rosa, this woman who had decided slowly and by evidence to extend her something that was not warmth exactly, but was its practical equivalent. Trust. Thank you, she said. I mean that. Rosa stood. Don't thank me, she said. Just don't let him win. She told Caleb after supper. He listened the way he always listened, completely without interrupting with the whole of his attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. His hands were very still on the table. He's watching you, he said. According to Rosa, yes. At night? The south pasture, which means he can see the house from there. She paused. Caleb. No, he said. No what? No, you're not moving into town. No, you're not reducing your movements. No, you're not... He stopped because he had answered questions she hadn't asked, which told her how fast his mind had been moving. I'm not going to let him make you smaller. She looked at him. I know that's not yours to decide, he said more carefully. I know you can handle yourself. I've watched you handle yourself for 3 weeks and you're more capable than anyone I know. But... He paused, and the thing in his face was not the managed architecture, not the careful stillness. It was raw and it was direct, and she had no defense prepared for it. I am not going to sit here and let him frighten you out of your own home. The word landed between them. Your own home. She thought she should say something sensible, something that addressed the practicalities and put the word in its correct context. She was working up the sensible response when he said, I'm going to put this in front of the county marshal. She blinked. Not the sheriff. Aldridge is a good man, but he's slow and he's local, and Holloway has too much history in this county. He had switched to the practical register now, which she understood was partly because the other register was costing him, and partly because the practical register was where he was most effective. The county marshal covers 3 counties, and he reports to the territorial office. He's not in Holloway's pocket, and he has actual authority to move against someone for harassment and intimidation. You need documented evidence of the watching, she said. Charlie and Billy can both provide statements. And you'd need to show a pattern. The fence incident, the Prescott complaint, the watching, that's a pattern. She looked at him. You've been thinking about this for a while. Since Prescott recanted, he admitted. I knew he'd try something else. I didn't know what. His jaw set. Now I know what. Caleb. She waited until he looked at her. This is the right move. But it's going to take time. And in the time it takes... I know, he said. He might escalate. He will escalate, she said. When men like this feel their options closing, they don't accept it. They push harder. He looked at her steadily. Are you afraid? She thought about that honestly. Not of him, she said. I've been afraid of men like him before, and it didn't help, and it didn't stop anything. So I made a decision to stop being afraid and start being strategic. She paused. I'm not afraid of him. I'm angry. Something moved through Caleb's expression, something that was not quite a smile and was more significant. Good, he said. Angry is useful. Boy. The school board voted on Tuesday, 4-1 in her favor. Finch came to tell her himself, which she read as a gesture of something perhaps not respect exactly, but the beginning of something in that direction. Wednesdays and Fridays, he said, 8 to noon. The position is provisional for the first term. That's fair, she said. Thank you, Mr. Finch. She rode back to the ranch with the appointment in her pocket and told Caleb at supper, and the expression on his face at the news was one of the things she would carry with her for a very long time. Not triumph and not relief, but something genuine and warm and completely unguarded. The face of a man who was happy for someone in a way that costs nothing and gains nothing and is just happiness. That's good, he said. That's really good, Evelyn. It's provisional, she said. It's a start, he said. That's what things begin as. She looked at him across the supper table, this man who had spent 5 years being alone in a house full of carefully managed silence, who had just said the most straightforwardly optimistic thing she had ever heard him say, and she let herself feel the full weight of what she had been not feeling for 3 weeks, which was considerable. Here, the county marshal arrived on a Thursday. His name was James Holt, a compact, methodical man in his 50s who had the air of someone who has spent decades making decisions that cost something and has developed a precise tolerance for exactly how much sentiment is useful in any given situation. He listened to Caleb's account. He read the documents. He took statements from Charlie and Billy separately and asked each of them the same questions in slightly different orders, the way experienced men do when they want to see if the answers stay consistent. They did. Holt made notes with a pencil stub that he kept sharpened to a precise point. You understand, he said when he had finished, that Grant Holloway is a well-established man in this territory. I understand that, Caleb said. And that the kind of complaint you're making against a man of that standing requires careful handling. I have documentation, Caleb said. I have witnesses. I have certified land records. What I'm asking you to do is look at what's in front of you and determine if the law applies equally to everyone. Holt looked at him for a moment. It does, he said. In my jurisdiction it does. Then I'd like it to apply to Grant Holloway. Holt put away his notebook. I'm going to pay Mr. Holloway a visit, he said. Officially. Which means he'll know you've contacted me. Which means he'll escalate, Evelyn said. Holt looked at her. It was the first time he had addressed her directly in the conversation. Possibly, he said, or he'll recognize that he's attracted official attention and calculate whether continuing serves his interests. Which one do you think? She asked. Holt considered. In my experience, men who've gotten away with pressure tactics for a long time don't stop easily. They test the boundaries first. He paused. Be careful. He was right about the testing. 2 days after Holt's visit to Holloway, a man came to Stone Ranch with a document. Not a hired hand. Not someone from the valley. A lawyer from Billings, young, clean, carefully dressed, who arrived at mid-morning and asked for Caleb Stone. He handed over an envelope. Inside was a legal filing. A civil suit claiming that Caleb Stone had entered into fraudulent business arrangements under false pretense. The specifics were elaborate and detailed, and were on close reading entirely constructed, but they were constructed with enough real dates and real names and real property records woven into the fabric of them that untangling the truth from the fabrication would require significant time and a lawyer of their own. Which was, of course, the point. Caleb read the filing with the careful completeness he brought to everything, and when he finished, his face was doing the thing that was not quite expressionless, but was working to be. He handed it to Evelyn. She read it. She read it a second time. And then she found the thing buried in the middle of page 4 that Holloway had apparently assumed she would not find or not understand or not know the significance of. Caleb, she said. I see it, he said. He had been watching her read. "He's using your father's original homestead filing," she said. "The date here is wrong, and the acreage listed is wrong." "Yes. Which means—" She thought through it fast. "He's claiming a discrepancy between the original homestead filing and the first expansion purchase. If that discrepancy were real, it would mean the entire western boundary was built on a flawed foundation. But it's not real," Caleb said, "because I saw my father's original filing in the county records we pulled last week." "Yes," she said. She looked up at him. "He's manufactured a discrepancy." "Yes. And he's filed this suit in Billings, not in the local county where the records that disprove it are held." She felt the cold clarity of it, the elegance of the attack, the specific way it had been designed to maximize cost and confusion. "He knew we'd been to the county seat. He had someone watching the land office. He knows what documents we pulled. So he built his fraud around the documents we don't have copies of here." Caleb looked at her. "The original homestead filing. We need a copy of it," she said. "A certified copy. That means someone going back to the county seat. Today," she said. "If he gets wind that we're moving on this, he'll find a way to complicate access to the records." She was already standing, already thinking through it. "I'll go." "Evelyn, you need to stay here," she said. "The marshal may return, and the ranch ed can't manage everything indefinitely." She met his eyes. "I can make the county seat by tomorrow morning if I leave in the next hour." "Alone," he said. "Alone," she said. "I've been alone before. Not with Holloway having people watching the road." The room was very still. She looked at him. He looked at her. Both of them were running the same calculation: what was riskier, who went, who stayed, what Holloway would do if he saw either of them leave. "He won't touch me," she said. "Holt has been to see him. Anything that happens to me now makes him the obvious suspect." "He's desperate," Caleb said. "Desperate men do things that don't serve their interests." "I know," she said, "but I'm not asking you to be comfortable with this. I'm asking you to trust my judgment." He was quiet for a long moment. "I trust your judgment," he said. "I don't trust Holloway." "Neither do I," she said. "That's why I need to move fast." She was already at the door when he said her name. She turned. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hand, and there was nothing careful about it this time, none of the deliberate thumb across the knuckles steadiness of the porch. He just held her hand and looked at her, and said nothing because he had said everything in the way he was holding on. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said. "I know," he said. "Be careful anyway." She squeezed his hand once and let go, and she walked out to the barn and saddled her horse and rode north, and the road stretched out ahead of her through Montana Territory's enormous indifference, and she was not afraid, and she was not pretending not to be afraid. She genuinely was not afraid, and she thought that was perhaps the truest measure of how much had changed. She had come to Red Hollow 3 weeks ago with $29 and a name that had traveled west ahead of her, and she had agreed to pretend to be someone's wife for practical reasons, and somewhere between the account ledgers and the cut fence and the porch in the dark, and a man who said, "I decided that 3 weeks ago she had stopped pretending to belong here. She belonged here. She was going to prove it." And Grant Holloway was going to discover what happened when you spent 2 years applying pressure to a man who had been alone long enough to forget his own strength and then gave him a reason to remember. She rode through the night. Not because she had planned to. She had planned to stop at a way station she knew was about 6 hours north, rest until dawn, and arrive at the county seat in the early morning. That was the sensible plan, the safe plan. But 2 hours out of Stone Ranch, she heard hoofbeats behind her. Not close, not aggressive. Just present, keeping distance, keeping pace. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She changed her direction slightly, angling east off the main road onto a cut-through trail she had noticed on their trip to the county seat, and she listened, and the hoofbeats adjusted. They were following her. She thought about that for exactly the time it took her horse to cover 100 yards, and then she made a decision. She pushed the horse harder, and rode through the dark without stopping, navigating by the stars and the shape of the land she had memorized on the way up, and she did not let herself think about how tired she was, or how cold, or how much she would have preferred to do this in daylight. She thought about the homestead filing. She thought about page 4 of Holloway's legal complaint. She thought about the specific date discrepancy that he had manufactured and what it would mean if she could place the original certified document beside it. She arrived at the county seat as the first pale light was beginning at the horizon, and she tied her horse at the hitching post outside the land office building and sat down on the steps to wait. The land office opened at 7. Watts, the registrar, arrived at 6:58. He stopped when he saw her sitting on his steps with road dust on her coat and the particular expression of someone who has been riding since yesterday afternoon. "Mrs. Stone," he said, "is everything all right?" "I need the original homestead filing for the Stone property," she said. "Certified copy with the official seal. Today." He looked at her for a moment. "Come inside," he said. Caleb spent the night the way he spent most things that required him to wait by working. He checked the fence line at the south pasture. He reviewed the supply inventory. He sat with the legal filing for 2 hours, reading it line by line with the methodical patience of a man who has learned that understanding the exact nature of a problem is the first requirement for solving it. Ed found him in the barn at midnight. "You should sleep," Ed said. "I know," Caleb said. "She'll be all right," Ed said. Caleb looked up. Ed was leaning against the stall door with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has been watching other people for 50 years and has developed opinions. "That woman rode out of here knowing exactly what she was riding into, and she did it anyway. That's not someone who gets rattled." He paused. "That's someone who knows what she's doing." "I know she knows what she's doing," Caleb said. "That's not what's keeping me up." Ed was quiet for a moment. Then, "First time in 5 years you've had something here worth being afraid of losing." Caleb looked at him. "I'm just observing," Ed said, with the mild defensiveness of someone who is absolutely not just observing. "Go to bed, Ed." "Going," Ed said. He moved toward the door and paused. "She fixed the kitchen garden, you know. Didn't ask. Didn't mention it. Just did it." "I know," Caleb said. "Your mother planted that garden," Ed said. "Been going to seed for 4 years." He left. Caleb sat in the barn with that for a long time. Marshal Holt came back the next morning. He arrived at 8, and his expression was different from the last time, not less controlled, but carrying something compressed, the look of a man who has found more than he expected and is deciding how much to say and in what order. "Is your wife here?" he asked. "She's at the county seat," Caleb said, "getting documents." Holt nodded slowly like this confirmed something. "Sit down, Mr. Stone." They sat at the kitchen table, and Holt placed his notebook on the surface between them and opened it to a page of careful handwriting. "I had a long conversation with Grant Holloway yesterday afternoon," he said. "And then I had a longer conversation with his lawyer. And then because things in that conversation suggested I made some inquiries at the Territorial Land Administration office." He paused. "The complaint about your western boundary, the one Holloway filed with the local sheriff, was submitted with documents that have been altered." Caleb was very still. "Altered," he said. "Specifically, the survey records he submitted as evidence show date stamps that don't correspond to the actual survey period. The stamps were added later. The originals on file at the territorial level show different dates that don't support his boundary claim." Holt paused. "That's not an error. That's fabrication." The kitchen was very quiet. "And the civil suit," Caleb said. "The one filed in Billings." "I've contacted the court in Billings," Holt said. "The filing contains references to documents that, according to the Territorial Archive, either don't exist or say something substantially different from what Holloway's filing claims." He looked at Caleb directly. "I want to be precise with you. What I've found so far is significant. Building a complete case that can be presented formally is going to take more time, but what I can tell you right now is that Grant Holloway has submitted falsified documents to at least 2 official bodies. In Montana Territory, that is a criminal matter. Caleb put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them. 2 years, he said. He's been working this for 2 years. Probably longer, Holt said. The railroad survey route has been anticipated for 3 years. He's been assembling land quietly along the projected corridor. Your western boundary is one of the last pieces he needed. He paused. You're not the only property owner he's been pressuring. You're just the one who pushed back hardest. Caleb looked up. There are others. 3 that I know of so far. 2 of them sold to him in the last 18 months. The third, Holt paused. The third is an elderly widow named Mrs. Patton, who has been trying to tell the local sheriff about document irregularities for 6 months and has been getting nowhere. Something moved through Caleb's expression. How old is she? 71. And she's been fighting him alone. Until now, Holt said. So, Evelyn arrived back at the ranch at 2 in the afternoon with a certified copy of Jedediah Stone's original homestead filing stamped and sealed, and absolutely definitive. And she found Caleb waiting for her on the porch with a look on his face that she couldn't entirely read. She climbed down from her horse, and he came off the porch to meet her halfway. You look terrible, he said. Thank you, she said. I rode all night. I know. He took the saddlebag from her shoulder without asking. Come inside. There's food, and there's something I need to tell you. She came inside and ate while he talked, and the story Holt had brought unfolded between them, and with each piece of it, she felt the shape of the whole thing resolve into something she could see clearly. He's been building this for 3 years, she said. Yes. And Mrs. Patton? Yes. She looked at the certified homestead document in her hands. This dismantles the civil suit in Billings completely. The date discrepancy he manufactured the original filing shows the correct dates. Everything he built his case on is contradicted by this. She paused. But Caleb, the civil suit was filed with a real court. Getting it formally dismissed is going to require someone making the case in front of a judge. Holt's working on it. Holt is one man with 3 counties, she said. He's thorough, but he's not fast. And while he's building the criminal case, Holloway is still... She stopped. I know, Caleb said. He's still capable of moving. What's he going to do when he realizes how much Holt has found? They looked at each other. He's going to do something he can't take back, Caleb said quietly. She set down the document. Then we need to make sure Holt has everything before that happens. I know, he paused. There's something else. She waited. I went to see Mrs. Patton this morning, he said. After Holt left. She hadn't expected that. She looked at him. She lives 6 miles east, he said. Small place. She's been there 40 years. Her husband built it. He paused. She let me in and gave me coffee and showed me everything she had. Every letter Holloway sent her. Every document he presented that didn't match what she had from her husband's estate. He looked at his hands. She had it all organized in a box, every piece of it dated in order. He was quiet for a moment. She told me she'd been to the sheriff 4 times. Each time he said he'd look into it. Nothing happened. She was alone, Evelyn said. An elderly widow with no one to stand beside her. He knew she didn't have the leverage to make anyone listen. Yes. Caleb looked up. She does now. What did you do? I told her what Holt had found. I told her she was not the only one, and that there was now a formal investigation. He paused. And I told her she should come forward and give her documents to Holt directly, and that I'd go with her if she wanted someone there. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. What? He said. Nothing, she said. I'm just nothing. But she was looking at him with the expression of someone who is seeing something come clear that they had suspected for a while, the way light shifts, and suddenly you see the full shape of something that was half visible before. This was who Caleb Stone was. Under the walls and the managed silence and the careful distance. A man who went to see a 71-year-old widow alone at dawn because he had heard she was fighting something she shouldn't have to fight by herself. She turned back to the document in her hands before he could see the full measure of what was in her face. "We should go to Holt together," she said. "You and me and Mrs. Patton. All the documents at once. Make it impossible to ignore." "That's what I was thinking," he said. "When? Tomorrow morning, early." She nodded. She looked at the homestead filing. She looked at page 4 of Holloway's fraudulent civil complaint, with its manufactured date discrepancy. And she looked at the certified original beside it. And she thought about 3 years of patient, methodical, relentless dishonesty directed at people who had simply built something and wanted to keep it. "He's going to find out tonight that we have this," she said. "Someone will tell him. He has ears everywhere." "I know. And he's going to know tomorrow what we're doing." "Yes." She looked up. "He might try to do something tonight, before we get to Holt." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I've got Ed in the hands watching every approach. Nobody comes onto this property without us knowing." "That's not what I'm worried about," she said. "I'm worried about Mrs. Patton." The room went still. Caleb stood up before she finished saying it. They rode to Mrs. Patton's property together, arriving just before dark. The woman who met them at the door was small and white-haired, and had the upright carriage of someone who had been determined for so long that it had become structural. She looked at Evelyn with a directness that Evelyn immediately respected. "You must be Mrs. Stone," she said. "Caleb told me about you." "I hope some of it was accurate," Evelyn said. Something shifted in the old woman's face, not quite a smile, but the same thing Rosa did when she decided to extend provisional approval. "He said you were the most practical person he'd ever met. He said it like he meant it as a compliment." "He did," Evelyn said. "For Caleb, practical is high praise." Mrs. Patton looked at Caleb. "I like her," she said. "I know," Caleb said. He said it with the absolute simplicity of someone stating a fact they've known for a while. They went inside, and Mrs. Patton showed them her box of documents, and Evelyn went through them with the focused attention she brought to ledgers and legal filings, reading carefully, checking dates, cross-referencing against what she knew from Holloway's filings. It was worse than she had expected. Not in the sense that she had underestimated Holloway, she had stopped underestimating him weeks ago, but in the sense that the systematic nature of what he had done to this woman was more thorough and more deliberate than what she'd seen directed at Caleb. Because Caleb had resources and standing, and the particular protection of being a man of known reputation. Mrs. Patton had had none of those things. He had sent her falsified documents claiming her husband's original deed contained errors. He had sent a lawyer to tell her the property was under legal dispute. He had made offers, low ones, framed as charitable, given the uncertainty of her situation. And when she had refused, he had applied the specific pressure of making an elderly woman feel that her hold on the only home she had ever known was fragile. She had refused anyway. She had kept every piece of paper and organized it in a box. Evelyn sat across from her at the kitchen table with the documents spread between them, and felt a particular quality of anger that she recognized, the kind that was clean and focused, and entirely without the heat that makes people careless. "You knew he was lying," she said. "I knew Robert's deed was sound," Mrs. Patton said. "Robert was meticulous. 40 years he kept records of everything." She looked at the box. "I knew if I held on long enough, someone would find the proof. I just needed someone to look for it." "Someone looked," Evelyn said, "and found it." "I know." The old woman looked at her steadily. "And I know what it cost you both to look, what Holloway put you through." She paused. "I'm sorry for your part of it." "Don't be," Evelyn said. "I'd do it again." She meant that. She felt the truth of it when she said it, not bravado, not performance. The plain fact that the thing she had done arriving in Red Hollow with $29 and agreeing to pretend had led her here to this table with these people, and she would not trade the path for an easier one. She became aware of Caleb watching her from across the table. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the documents and kept her voice steady and felt his attention. The way you feel warmth from a fire you're not facing directly. They stayed at Mrs. Patton's place until 9 that evening, helping her organize the documents into a presentation that Marshall Holt could work through systematically. On the way back to Stone Ranch, the road was dark and quiet, and the night was enormous around them. And Caleb drove the wagon with the same unhurried steadiness he brought to everything. And Evelyn sat beside him and felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been running on determination for 24 hours and has finally reached a moment where running is no longer required. She was almost asleep. She could feel it coming, the loosening at the edges when he said quietly, "Evelyn? Are you awake?" "Barely," she said honestly. "Go to sleep," he said. "I'll wake you when we're home." She registered the word, home. She didn't have the energy to examine it with any of her usual careful inspection. She leaned slightly, not dramatically, against his shoulder. She felt him go very still. Then carefully, he adjusted his position to make the angle easier, and he kept driving, and she slept for 20 minutes until they reached the ranch, and it was the most uncomplicated 20 minutes she had spent in a long time. The next morning arrived with everything at once. Holloway moved before they did. The message came through Billy at 6 in the morning, a note delivered to the ranch by a man who rode up fast and handed it to the first person he saw and didn't wait for a response. Caleb read it and handed it to Evelyn without a word. It was addressed to both of them. "I know about your meeting with the marshal. I know about the widow Patton. I know what documents you've been collecting. Before you take this further, you should understand that I have a letter written in your wife's own hand that she sent to a man in Missouri 3 months before arriving in Red Hollow. The contents of this letter make very clear the nature of her intentions regarding men of property in the Montana Territory. I am prepared to submit this to both the marshal and the civil court in Billings unless we come to an arrangement regarding the western boundary before noon today. Come alone, Stone. Leave your wife at home. We'll settle this like men." Caleb set the note on the table. Evelyn read it twice. Then she put it down. "He's lying," she said. "I know. There is no letter. I wrote to 3 school boards in the territory and a minister in Billings who had advertised for a church secretary. That's all I wrote." She looked at Caleb. "He's manufactured it. Or he's claiming a real letter is something it isn't." "I know," Caleb said again. "Caleb." "I'm not going," he said. She stopped. "He said come alone," Caleb said, "which means he wants me away from this property and away from you and away from the documents so that he can do something. I don't know what, but it's not a negotiation. Men who are genuinely willing to negotiate don't threaten from a position that's already crumbling." He paused. "He's desperate." "Yes," she said. "Which means he's more dangerous right now than he's ever been." "Yes." "What are you going to do?" He had already stood up. "I'm going to send for Holt, now, today. And I'm going to have everything, every document, your certified homestead copy, Mrs. Patton's box, all of it in front of him before noon." She stood too. "Then I'll get the documents organized. Evelyn." He stopped her with her name the way he sometimes did, quietly, with a weight in it that was separate from the practical meaning. She turned. "Whatever letter he claims to have," he said, "whatever it actually is, whatever he says it means, Caleb, I'm not going to believe it," he said. "I'm telling you now before any of it lands in front of me, I'm not going to believe it." She looked at him. This man who had spent 5 years behind walls he had built with excellent reasons. This man who had said, "I decided that 3 weeks ago on a road in the Montana Territory and had not taken it back." "I know," she said. "Good," he said. "Let's get to work." Holt arrived by 10. He came with 2 deputies this time, which told her that the territory had decided Grant Holloway was worth the manpower, and she felt something loosen in her chest at the sight of 3 horses coming up the road. She had the documents laid out on the study table, organized, labeled, cross-referenced. The certified homestead copy beside Holloway's fraudulent civil complaint. The falsified survey records beside the territorial originals. Mrs. Patton's box arranged chronologically. Prescott's recantation with Moore's witnessing signature. The fence incident report. The watching. She had done it the same way she had done the account ledgers on her first week at the ranch, because disorder was something she could fix, and fixing things was how she thought clearly. Holt looked at the table and then at her. "You've done my job for me," he said. "I organized it," she said. "You still have to do the hard part." He went through everything. He asked questions, precise ones, the kind that filled specific gaps in the documentation chain. He had one of his deputies make detailed notes. Then he looked up from the table and said, "The letter Holloway claims to have." "Doesn't exist as he's describing it," Evelyn said. "He may believe it does," Holt said. "Or he may be testing whether the threat alone moves you." "It didn't move us," Caleb said. "I can see that." Holt looked at him. "The note he sent this morning is itself useful. A man making threats to prevent legal proceedings is demonstrating consciousness of guilt." He paused. "I'm prepared to move on this today, formally, but I want you both to understand what that means." "It means he finds out it's over," Caleb said. "It means the period between now and when he formally faces consequences is the most dangerous period," Holt said. "A man who has invested 3 years and significant resources in something who sees it collapsing, who is calculating his options." He paused. "I want someone with both of you until this is resolved." "I have Ed and the hands," Caleb said. "Keep them close," Holt said. "All of them." He closed his notebook. "I'm going to pay Mr. Holloway a different kind of visit than last time." He left with his deputies and the house was quiet after they went. Caleb looked at the table full of documents, the accumulated evidence of 3 years of Holloway's work and 3 weeks of theirs, and something in his posture shifted. Not relaxation exactly. Something more like the adjustment of weight when you've been braced against something for a long time and have for the first moment reason to believe the bracing might almost be over. "What happens now?" she asked. "We wait," he said. "And we make sure everyone on this property is where I can account for them." "And Holloway?" "Makes his calculation." He looked at her. "He's going to realize that threatening us was a mistake, because it tells Holt exactly where his head is, and Holt is not someone who misses what that means." Boy. The afternoon was the longest of the past month. Evelyn taught herself not to watch the road by finding things to do, which was her standard approach to anxiety, and which had never once actually resolved the anxiety, but had consistently resulted in productive outcomes. She baked, she organized. She sat with Rosa in the kitchen and talked about the ranch in the way they had learned to talk, with the practical frankness of 2 women who have decided they prefer direct information to performed comfort. "He's going to come here," Rosa said. "Possibly," Evelyn said. "He's the kind of man who needs to say what he's going to do in person," Rosa said, "to feel like he's still in control of how things end." Evelyn looked at her. "You've known men like him." "I've known exactly one," Rosa said. "He was my first employer in this territory. He had the same smile." She paused, organizing something. "He did not end well." "What happened to him?" "He overestimated how many people would keep quiet when finally given a reason to speak." Rosa glanced at her sideways. "People generally want to tell the truth. They just need to feel safe enough to do it." Evelyn thought about that. "Rosa," she said, "why did you tell me about Sarah?" Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Because you needed to know what you were working with," she said. "Not to manage him, not to protect yourself." She paused. "Because you deserve to understand the full thing you were deciding about." Evelyn looked at her hands on the table. "Was it obvious?" she said. "That I was deciding—" Rosa made the sound that was her version of a dry laugh. "From the second week," she said, yawned. "Holloway came at 4. Not with the 2 men he'd had before. Alone." Which was, Evelyn understood immediately, not bravado. It was strategy. A man arriving alone with no visible support looks like a man who has accepted something. A man who is done fighting. She watched him from the kitchen window. Caleb was on the porch. He had seen him coming. She moved to the door. Caleb put out one hand, not looking at her. Not stopping her, just indicating he knew she was there. She stayed in the doorway. Holloway pulled up at the fence. He looked at Caleb for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "The marshal came to see me." "I know," Caleb said. "The civil suit is going to be dismissed." "I know that too." Holloway was quiet for a moment. He looked older than he had in his previous appearances, not dramatically, but with the particular aging that comes from a thing going wrong that was supposed to go right. "The documents I submitted. There are irregularities." "There are fabrications," Caleb said. "That's the more accurate word." Holloway's jaw moved. "I built something here," Holloway said. 20 years. This valley was nothing when I came. I put money into it and time into it and you decided that entitled you to what other people built," Caleb said. His voice was even. Not angry. Evelyn had learned that Caleb's version of anger ran cool rather than hot, which made it considerably more effective. "Mrs. Patton's husband homesteaded that property before you arrived in this territory. My father broke this land before the railroad was anything but a rumor. What we built wasn't available for you to take because you had a plan for it. It wasn't—" Holloway stopped. "The railroad changes everything. The land will be worth—" "It's our land," Caleb said. "Whatever it's worth." The silence between them had a weight to it. Holloway looked past Caleb, at Evelyn in the doorway. She met his eyes and did not look away. Something moved through his expression, not the calculation she was used to seeing there, but something beneath it, something that might have been in a man with more capacity for it, something close to shame. "The letter," he said. "There is no letter," Evelyn said from the doorway. "You know there isn't." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "There isn't." He looked back at Caleb. "I'm going to fight the marshal's findings," he said. "That's your right," Caleb said. "I have lawyers." "You have lawyers who submitted falsified documents to 2 official bodies," Caleb said. "They're going to be occupied with their own situation." Holloway's hands tightened on the reins. "This isn't how I intended things to go," he said. "No," Caleb said. "It never is." Another silence. Then Holloway turned his horse. He rode back down the road, the way he had come, and the afternoon light fell flat across his back, and he looked for the first time since Evelyn had laid eyes on him, like a man who was leaving rather than arriving. She let out a breath she hadn't entirely been aware of holding. Caleb came off the porch and walked to her, and he stood in front of her and looked at her face with the careful attention he brought to things that mattered to him. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you—" "I don't know yet," he said with the honesty that had always been the thing she trusted most about him. "I think so. Ask me in an hour." She almost laughed. She felt it, that loosening thing, the real kind, the kind that meant something had released. "In an hour," she said. The formal proceedings took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of depositions and document reviews, and Holt working with methodical patience through the accumulated evidence, and a judge in Billings who read everything and asked clear questions, and whose expression when he finished reading Holloway's submitted documents against the territorial originals was the expression of a man encountering something that has confirmed a thing he had hoped not to have confirmed. The civil suit was dismissed. The boundary dispute was formally resolved in Caleb's favor. Grant Holloway was charged with 3 counts of submitting falsified documents to official bodies and 1 count of fraudulent business practice directed at Mrs. Patton. His lawyers engaged. It would take time. But the charges were real, and the evidence was documented, and the man who had spent 3 years moving quietly through this valley like weather present everywhere visible. Nowhere was now the subject of a territorial investigation. And that was not something that could be walked back. Mrs. Patton came to the ranch on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after Holt had taken Holloway's files, and she sat on the porch with Evelyn and drank tea and talked for 2 hours about her husband and the ranch he had built and the 40 years she had spent on it. When she stood to leave, she took Evelyn's hand. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right," Evelyn said. "I've been a widow for 7 years," she said. "And for 7 years, I have been very careful to handle everything myself, because I believed that was what independence required." She paused. Caleb Stone came to my door at 6 in the morning and sat down and listened to me for 2 hours. And it was the first time in 7 years that I had told someone everything and not felt the need to apologize for it. She looked at Evelyn. That is not an ordinary man. No, Evelyn said. He isn't. And you are not an ordinary woman. She squeezed her hand once firmly. Don't let either of you waste it. She left. Evelyn stood on the porch and watched her go and thought about not wasting things. That evening, Caleb found her at the kitchen table with the account ledgers. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked up. It's over, he said. I know, she said. He came in and sat across from her, and he put his forearms on the table, and he looked at her directly, with the look that had no architecture in front of it, no management, no carefully maintained distance. The arrangement, he said. She closed the ledger. Yes, she said. Holloway is finished. The boundary is settled. Prescott is gone. The civil suit is dismissed. He paused. Every reason we put on paper for why you were here is gone. She looked at him steadily. Is that... He stopped. He started again with the deliberateness of a man choosing words like, he is choosing the weight they will have to carry. I don't want you to go because the arrangement ended. I want you to stay because... He stopped again. Caleb, she said. Because this is your home, he said. That's what I keep coming back to. It's been your home since about the second week, if I'm honest. Maybe earlier. You fixed the kitchen garden and reorganized the accounts, and you walked into that hotel and faced down Prescott by yourself, and you rode to the county seat through the night, and somewhere in all of it this became... He looked at her. It became real. She said nothing. I know I'm not... He paused. I know this started badly. I know I have habits, distances. I know I'm not easy. He looked at his hands. But I stopped wanting to be alone when you arrived, and that is the truest thing I have said in 5 years, and probably the hardest. She looked at him for a long time. This man, this careful, stubborn, generous, genuinely good man who had built walls around himself with the same patient attention he brought to everything, and who was sitting across from her right now without any of the walls in place, just himself, just the real and undefended version of him. Caleb, she said. What? You told me once that you made a rule, she said. He looked up. Yes. Never love someone again. Yes. He held her gaze. And did it work? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen was warm and still, and the ledgers were closed between them, and outside the ranch was settling into evening, all its sounds and distances resting. No, he said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand and held on the same way he had held on that night on the porch, firmly without drama, like something he intended to continue. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Good, he said, and the word came out rough at the edges the way words come out when they are carrying more than their syllables account for. Good. She squeezed his hand. You should know, she said. And she could hear the thing in her own voice that she had been managing for a month, the warmth she had kept carefully calibrated. Now uncalibrated, now just what it was. You should know that I stopped pretending around the second week, too. He looked at her. What were you pretending? That this was temporary, she said. That I was going to leave, and it wasn't going to cost me anything. And I was wrong on both counts, she said. He was looking at her with that look, the full, undefended, real one. Evelyn, he said. What? He stood up. He came around the table. He took her face in his hands with the same careful deliberateness he brought to everything, like something he was absolutely certain he wanted to do, and was giving its full weight. And then, for the first time, Caleb Stone kissed her. Not tentatively, not like a question, like a man who has made a decision and is not going to make it halfway. She kissed him back with everything she had stopped pretending she didn't feel, and it was the most honest thing she had done since arriving in Red Hollow, and she felt it down to the floor. When they separated, the kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her. She looked at him. "That rule," she said. "That rule." He agreed with something in his voice that was entirely new warmth, without walls, unmanaged, unguarded, just itself. "You broke it," she said. He shook his head slowly. "You showed me I was wrong for making it," he said. She looked at his face, this face she had been studying for a month, cataloging every fractional shift and careful adjustment, and now looking at completely open, and she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel for a very long time. She felt safe. Not because someone was protecting her. She had never needed that. But because she was somewhere she had chosen with someone who had chosen her back, and the choosing was real. "Stay," he said. It was the simplest word he had said to her, and the most significant. "I already told you," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." The morning after Caleb kissed her, Evelyn woke up before sunrise and lay still in the spare room. Her room, the room she had slept in for a month, and looked at the plain ceiling and made herself think clearly. She had a rule. She had broken it. She had broken it willingly and with full understanding of what she was doing, and she did not regret it, and she was not going to pretend she did. But she was also a practical woman, and practical women, even when they are in the middle of something that feels like the realest thing they have ever done, do not stop thinking about what comes next. What came next was real life. What came next was a teaching position that was provisional, a town that had not fully decided what to think of her, a legal situation that was resolved but not closed, and a man who had spent 5 years building distance between himself and the world, and had now, in the space of one evening in a kitchen with closed ledgers, taken most of it down. She got up and started coffee. Caleb came in at 6, which was later than usual, and she understood from that small deviation that he had also been awake thinking, and that the thinking had kept him in his room longer than work normally permitted. He stopped when he saw her. She poured him coffee and set it on the table, and sat down across from him and said, "We should talk about last night." "All right," he said. He sat down. He wrapped his hands around the cup. He looked at her directly, which she had come to understand was his version of making himself available, not reaching out because that was not how he was built, but removing the barriers so that reaching was possible. "I meant what I said," she told him. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not taking that back." She paused. "But I want to be honest with you about what I'm afraid of." Something in his expression shifted, not defensiveness, but attention. The full, complete kind. "Tell me," he said. "I'm afraid," she said carefully, "that this is still the arrangement just with a different name on it. That you needed something, and I provided it, and now the need has changed, but the dynamic is the same." She held his gaze. "I'm afraid that you want me here because of what I do for this place. The accounts and the kitchen and the hands and the way I managed Holloway." She paused. "And not because of who I am, when none of that is useful." He was very still. "That's a real fear," he said. "I know it is. And I'm not going to tell you it's wrong to have it," he said, "because you've had good reasons to develop it." He put down the cup. "But I'm going to tell you the truth. And the truth is that I fell in love with you on a Tuesday morning when you were arguing with me about the supply order." She blinked. "You told me I'd been ordering coffee beans in the wrong quantity for what was probably several years," he said, "and you said it in the exact tone of someone who had decided this was going to be corrected, whether or not I had opinions about it." Something moved in his face, warm, unguarded, completely real. "It had nothing to do with the accounts. It had nothing to do with Holloway. It was just you, the way you are." She looked at him. "The coffee beans," she said. "The coffee beans," he confirmed. She pressed her lips together against something that was not quite a laugh and not quite tears, but was in the territory between them. "Caleb Stone, that is the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "I know," he said. "But it's true, and I thought you preferred true." She looked at him for a long moment. This man with his Riverstone eyes and his jaw that set when things cost him, and his absolute unflinching honesty about everything that mattered. "I do," she said. "I prefer true." "Then here's what's also true," he said. "I want you here because you make this place feel like something worth coming home to. Because you see things clearly, and you say them plainly, and you don't ask me to be different from what I am." He paused. "And because when you fell asleep on my shoulder on the way back from Mrs. Patton's, I didn't want the road to end." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's better than the coffee beans," she said softly. "I thought you'd think so," he said. She reached across the table. He took her hand. They sat like that for a while in the early morning, with the coffee getting warm between them and the ranch waking up outside, and it was ordinary, and it was everything. The town of Red Hollow made its decision about Evelyn Carter Stone over the following weeks, and it made it the way communities make decisions about people slowly, incompletely, and largely through the accumulation of small interactions that nobody considers significant at the time. Her second week teaching a boy named Samuel Briggs, 8 years old. Stubborn as a fence post and academically resistant in the particular way of children who have decided that difficulty is less painful than failure, refused to read aloud in class. She didn't push him. She didn't embarrass him. At the end of the lesson, she kept him back for 3 minutes and said, "What's the hard part?" He looked at his shoes. "The letters get mixed up." She said, "Show me." He showed her. She watched where the letters confused him, found the pattern, and spent the next 4 Wednesdays working with him on that specific thing alone before the other students arrived. By the 5th Wednesday, Samuel Briggs read aloud in class without being asked. His mother came to the school the following Monday and stood in the doorway with an expression that contained several things at once and said, "He reads to his father every evening now. His father is not well. Samuel reads him to sleep." Evelyn said, "He's very good at it. He just needed to find his way in." The woman looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "I heard things about you when you arrived. I want you to know I don't believe them anymore." It was not an apology. It was better than an apology. It was a woman saying, "I looked at the evidence and I changed my mind." "Thank you," Evelyn said. Mrs. Cooper from the Ladies' Auxiliary came to see her the following week with the 2 women who had accompanied her at the church, and they brought a pie and the manner of people performing a renegotiation. "We wanted to welcome you properly," Mrs. Cooper said. "I appreciate that," Evelyn said, and let them in, and served the pie, and listened to them with the full attention that people respond to when they're not used to receiving it. And by the time they left, the renegotiation was complete. Not warm exactly, warmth took longer, and that was all right. But real. The beginning of something that could become real friendship if given sufficient time and mutual honesty. Reverend Moore told her on a Sunday after the service that the congregation had voted to formally support the new teaching position and petition the school board to make it permanent. "They voted," she said. "Unanimously," he said. "Well, nearly." Who voted against? Harold Finch. But Harold votes against everything the first time. It's his way of maintaining standards. Moore looked at her with those calm, observant eyes. "He'll come around." He did. 2 weeks later, Finch told her the position was permanent and that the school board was considering expanding the school term by 4 weeks, and would she be available for the additional time? She said yes before he finished asking. The thing that surprised her most was not the town. She had expected the town to be slow, and she had been right, and she had patience for slow, because slow at least was honest. What surprised her was Caleb. Not in the ways she might have anticipated, not in dramatic reversals or sweeping gestures. In the small ways. The ways that were visible only because she had been watching him carefully for long enough to know what his baseline was. He began sitting on the porch chairs in the evening. Not just existing near them, actually sitting in the way of someone who had decided the porch was a place to be rather than a feature of the structure. He began leaving the study door open when he worked at night. He started talking to Ed differently, not the functional communication of a man directing work, but the actual conversation of someone who had remembered that the people around him were people. He told Billy about a good horse trader 2 counties north, and Billy came back from the trip with a young mare and the expression of someone who has been treated like an adult by someone they respect and will not forget it. He went back to see Mrs. Patton twice without being asked, just to check on her, just to be present in the way that had meant something to her the first time. Evelyn noticed all of it and said nothing about it. She understood that pointing to these things would make him self-conscious about them, and self-conscious was the enemy of natural, and what was happening to Caleb Stone was natural. A man slowly, carefully, without drama, allowing himself to be part of the world again. One evening, she came in from the barn to find him sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Not coffee tea, which he drank, and he generally regarded as insufficient, and 2 cups. She stopped in the doorway. "Rosa made the tea," he said. "I didn't know how." "You made tea," she said. "Rosa made it," he repeated. "I just put it in the cups." She sat down. She picked up the cup. "This is very good tea," she said. "Rosa's good at things," he said. She looked at him over the cup with an expression she didn't bother to manage the full warm thing. And he looked back with that open look that still sometimes surprised her with its completeness. "Caleb," she said. "What?" "Nothing," she said. "Just nothing." He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his tea. They sat together in the quiet kitchen while the ranch settled into evening, and it was everything. So, the twist that none of them had anticipated arrived 6 weeks after Holloway's formal charges were filed. It came in the form of a letter from the territorial governor's office. Not to Caleb, to Evelyn. She was in the school when it arrived. A student brought it from the post office at noon, carrying it with the particular solemnity that children assign to official-looking envelopes. She waited until the students had gone home, and then she opened it. She read it twice. Then she sat down in the chair behind her desk, the chair that still felt new, the chair that was hers, and she read it a 3rd time. The letter was from the governor's territorial education office. It referenced her teaching record in Missouri, which had apparently been formally reviewed as part of the broader investigation into the complaint network that Holloway and his associates had used against multiple individuals in the territory. The review initiated by Holt as part of the fraud investigation had determined that the original complaints against her in Missouri were themselves part of a coordinated effort by Douglas Hale, who had in the past year made similar accusations against 2 other women in Jefferson City who had refused him. The letter formally cleared her name in the Missouri education record. It stated that the Jefferson City School Board had been notified of the findings. It stated that the complaints previously made against Evelyn Carter were without merit and had been made in bad faith. And it stated in the careful, measured language of official correspondence that the Territorial Education Office wished to extend its apologies for the disruption this had caused her professional life. She held the letter in her hands for a long time. The classroom was very quiet. The afternoon light was coming through the windows at a low angle, the way it did in late summer, and she could hear the street outside, and somewhere in the distance, cattle, and the ordinary sounds of Red Hollow going about its afternoon. She thought about Jefferson City, about the year she had spent watching her reputation dissolve one dropped word at a time. About the morning she had packed her suitcase and chosen west because there was nothing left in the direction she'd been facing. She thought about a stagecoach and $32 and a name that had traveled ahead of her. She thought about a man who had grabbed her arm before she could fall, not from the mud, but from something worse, and who had said 3 words in a crowded street that had changed the entire direction of everything. She folded the letter. She picked up her coat. She walked home. Caleb was at the fence line when she arrived talking to Ed about something, and he looked up when he heard her horse, and something in the way she was riding made him hand the conversation back to Ed and walk to meet her. She dismounted, and she handed him the letter without speaking. He read it. He read it again. When he looked up, his face was doing something she hadn't seen it do before. Something that was not the careful management or the fractional shifts or the open warmth she had been accumulating for weeks. Something older and more complete than all of those. The expression of a man who is feeling something too large for his face to fully contain. "Evelyn," he said, I know, she said. This is... He stopped. He's being held responsible. Hale. Yes. It came from our investigation, he said. Holt's investigation. Holloway's network led them back to Hale. Yes, she said again. He looked at the letter again. He looked at her. You spent a year, everything you lost. It's being returned, she said. She could hear the unevenness in her own voice, and she let it be there. She was not going to manage this one. She had decided on the walk to the door that she was not going to manage this one. Not all of it. You can't return a year, but the record, my name, that's being returned. He folded the letter with both hands carefully, the way he handled things that mattered, and then he put it in her coat pocket, and he held on to her hands. You came here with nothing, he said. I came here with $32 and a bad reputation, she said. And you won, he said. She looked at him. We won, she said. He pulled her toward him, and she went. She let herself go fully, without the careful calibration, without the management. And she felt his arms around her, and his hand on the back of her head, and she stood in the yard of Stone Ranch in the late afternoon and held on. She cried because some things deserved to be cried over, and she had been holding this particular weight for a very long time. He didn't say anything. He just held on. After a while, she stepped back and looked at him, and he looked at her with no pretense and no distance and nothing between them. Coffee beans, she said, half a laugh. What? He said. Nothing, she said. Take me home. He took her hand, and they walked inside. Tita. Ed heard about the letter that evening. Rosa told him because Rosa had a network of information that the territorial marshal himself might have envied. And he came to the kitchen door with his hat in his hands and said, Glad to hear it, Mrs. Stone. Deserved it a long time ago. He turned and went back to the barn before she could respond, which was very Ed. Billy came the next morning with the mare he'd bought from the trader 2 counties north, and the mare had apparently, in Billy's assessment, the best temperament he'd ever seen in a horse, and he wanted Mrs. Stone to have her. She stood there, looking at this 22-year-old boy with his earnest, transparent face and his genuine, uncomplicated heart, and she said, Billy, I can't take your horse. She'd be better used here, he said. And besides, he went red. You went to bat for all of us, for this place, the whole business with Holloway. He pushed the mare's lead toward her. Just take her, Mrs. Stone. She took the mare. She named her patience, which Caleb said was either very apt or very ironic, and possibly both. Rosa's approval, which had been extending itself in measured increments since the first week, arrived fully, and without announcement one morning, when Evelyn came into the kitchen to find that Rosa had rearranged the cabinet she had originally reorganized in her first week to incorporate a modification that was, Evelyn had to admit, better than her original system. She looked at it. She looked at Rosa. The flour goes better on the lower shelf, Rosa said. You have to reach too high every time. You're right, Evelyn said. I know, Rosa said, and went back to what she was doing. It was the most complete acceptance Evelyn had ever received from anyone. The hearing for Grant Holloway's case was set for October in a federal court in Helena. Holt came to the ranch in September to review everything one final time, and he sat at the kitchen table with his notebook and his pencil stub, and he went through the evidence chain with the thoroughness that Evelyn had come to deeply respect, because thoroughness was what protected real things from people who preferred things to be vague. Holloway's legal team is arguing procedural defects in the document collection, Holt said. What kind of defects? Caleb asked. They're claiming the original survey records at the territorial office were accessed improperly, that the comparison to Holloway's submitted documents was made without formal authorization. Evelyn said, Watts at the county land office accessed those records on request of a formal inquiry, Holt's inquiry, which Holloway's lawyers are arguing was improperly authorized, Holt said. He did not look concerned. He looked like a man who has heard this particular category of argument before and knows its limitations. It won't hold, but it will delay the proceeding. How long? Caleb said. A month, perhaps 6 weeks. Holt paused. In the meantime, I need both of you to be available for depositions. We'll be available, Evelyn said. Holt looked at her. There's something else. He paused, and the pause was different from his usual measured silences. This one had something in it that was not caution, but was adjacent to it. Douglas Hale has been subpoenaed. The kitchen went still. She had not allowed herself to think about Douglas Hale very often. She had built very specific practices around not thinking about Douglas Hale, because thinking about him led to thinking about the year she had spent, and thinking about that year led to a particular quality of anger that she did not find productive and could not afford. For what purpose? She said. Her voice was even. His coordinated complaint activity against you and others in Missouri is being considered as evidence of the broader pattern, Holt said. The Territorial Attorney's Office believes Holloway and Hale have a previous relationship, that Prescott's appearance here was not coincidental, that Hale knew Holloway through a land investment network operating across several territories. He paused. We're looking at something larger than one man's boundary dispute. Caleb looked at her. She was processing this with the deliberate focus she used when she needed to think clearly and emotion was working against clarity. Hale will deny everything, she said. Probably, Holt said. He's had practice, she said. He's been denying things for years. Yes, Holt said. But Prescott is cooperating, and 2 of the women in Jefferson City have agreed to provide testimony. And there are land records that connect Holloway's acquisitions to a holding company that Hale has a partial interest in. He paused. A man can deny a great deal, Mrs. Stone. He cannot deny documented evidence. She looked at her hands on the table. Will I need to testify? She asked. Possibly, Holt said. I want to prepare you for that possibility. She was quiet for a moment. Then, good, she said. Holt looked at her. I have been waiting a year and a half, she said, to say what is true to someone who is required to write it down. She looked up at him. Tell me when and where. Caleb walked Holt to his horse when he left, and when he came back in, Evelyn was still at the table. He sat down. He said nothing for a moment. Then, You don't have to testify if you don't want to. I know, she said. Holt will build the case on the documents. He might not need your testimony at all. I know that too, she said. So why? Because the women in Jefferson City are testifying, she said, and they don't know me. They don't owe me anything. They're going to stand up in front of a federal court and say what is true because it needs to be said. She looked at him. How could I not do the same? He looked at her. You've been thinking about them, he said. The other women. Since Holt first mentioned them, she said. Yes. You don't know their names. No, she said. But I know what the last year and a half felt like. And I know that whatever they went through it while Douglas Hale kept going about his business. She paused. He's not going to keep going about his business. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. Then we'll go to Helena, he said. Together, she said. Did you think I'd let you go alone? She looked at him. I can handle myself. I know you can, he said. That's never been the question. He held her gaze. The question is whether you want to. She looked at his hand over hers, the roughness of it, the steadiness. No, she said quietly. I don't want to handle it alone. Good, he said. Then we go together. Whoa. The deposition in Helena was on a Wednesday in late September. The federal court building was stone and imposing and smelled like old paper. And the attorney who took Evelyn's statement was a young man who had the careful manner of someone conducting something significant. She answered every question clearly and completely, without embellishment and without diminishment. She described what Douglas Hale had done, and what he had told people she had done, and she described the consequences of that, and she described arriving in Red Hollow with $32 and a reputation that had been deliberately constructed to follow her. She said it all in the plain, even voice of someone who has decided that the truth does not require decoration and does not benefit from emotion. And the attorney wrote it down, and the court reporter recorded it, and the room was very quiet, in the way that rooms are quiet when something that has been waiting to be said is finally being said. When it was over, the attorney thanked her, and she stood, and Caleb was in the corridor outside, and he fell into step beside her without speaking, and they walked out of the building together into the September afternoon. She stopped on the steps. He stood beside her. "Well," she said. "Yes," he said. She breathed in the cold air. "That's the last time I will ever have to say all of that." "Yes," he said. "It is." She stood there for another moment. Then she turned and looked at him. This man who had ridden 12 hours to Helena to stand in a corridor so that she wouldn't come out of a difficult room alone, and she felt the full weight of every decision that had led to this moment. Every refusal, and every consequence, and every mile west, and the bench outside Harmon's General Store, and a hand that steadied her when she stumbled. "I want to go home," she said. "Then let's go home," he said. The hearing came in October as scheduled, delayed by 3 weeks from the original date. Grant Holloway arrived in Helena with 2 lawyers and the appearance of a man who has not yet decided to accept that something is finished. He was well dressed and composed, and he looked at the evidence that Holt's team presented with the specific expression of someone watching a building they own being demolished. The federal judge was a woman, which surprised Holloway's lawyers more visibly than was wise. Evelyn observed from the gallery a woman in her 50s named Judge Clara Marsh, who had the bearing of someone who has presided over enough dishonesty to recognize it on sight and has long since stopped being patient with it. She read the falsified documents beside the originals. She read Prescott's signed recantation. She reviewed Mrs. Patton's organized box of correspondence. She heard Holt's testimony regarding the document chain. She heard Watts from the county land office describe the specific discrepancies between the documents Holloway had submitted and the originals on territorial record. She did not rush any of it. She gave each piece its full consideration. And when it was over, she looked at Grant Holloway over her reading glasses with an expression that was not anger. Anger would have been easier for him, but something colder and more final. The expression of someone who has arrived at a verdict not from feeling, but from fact. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "the evidence presented in this proceeding establishes with sufficient clarity that documents submitted to 2 official bodies were altered with the intent to support claims that would not have been supportable with accurate documentation. That is not a technicality, that is fraud. The law does not make exceptions for the scale of a man's ambitions or the length of time he spent in their pursuit." She found Holloway guilty on 2 of the 3 counts. The 3rd count was referred to a territorial grand jury for further consideration. She ordered the civil suit in Billings permanently dismissed. She restored all boundary designations to their certified records. She issued a formal finding that the complaint against Mrs. Patton's property was without merit and had been filed in bad faith. And she awarded damages, not large ones. The law constrained her on amounts, but real ones. Documented. On the record. When it was over, Caleb stood in the corridor outside the courtroom, and he looked like a man who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just been permitted to set it down. Evelyn stood beside him. Mrs. Patton was there with her upright posture and her direct gaze, and she shook Caleb's hand, and then she shook Evelyn's, and she said, "Robert would have liked you both very much." The corridor was noisy around them, lawyers and officials, and the movement of people who had finished with this day's proceedings. But the 4 of them, Mrs. Patton and Holt, and Caleb and Evelyn, stood in a small pocket of quiet that was different from the noise. "What happens to Holloway now?" Evelyn asked Holt. "The criminal conviction limits his ability to operate in the territory," Holt said. "The 3rd count is still pending. His legal costs will be substantial, and his reputation in the land acquisition circles he's been working is—" He paused. "Finished." "And Hale," she said. "The Jefferson City matter is being handled by Missouri authorities," Holt said. "I can't speak to the timeline, but the federal record here is going to follow him." He looked at her. "He's not going to practice business in this territory." She nodded. Was that enough? Caleb asked her quietly. For now. She thought about it honestly. For now, she said. Yes. King. They rode home from Helena over 2 days, the same way they had ridden to the county seat in August, with the land enormous around them, and the sky clear, and Caleb quiet beside her, in the way that was not absence, but presence that trusted the silence. On the second afternoon with Stone Ranch about an hour away, he said, I want to ask you something. She looked at him. We've been what we are. He said with the slight awkwardness of a man who is precise with tools and cattle and account ledgers, and is less fluent with the vocabulary of emotion. For 2 months now, and I want to ask you something formally. She waited. Not because the arrangement requires it, he said, or because anything requires it, but because I want to do it right. He paused. I want to marry you. Actually, legally, with a ceremony and a record and everything it's supposed to be. He looked at her directly. If you'll have me. She looked at him for a moment. Caleb Stone, she said. We've been telling this entire town we're married for 2 months. I know, he said. I want it to be real. It is real, she said. Then I want it to be official, he said, and the slight roughness in his voice told her how much the asking had cost him, not because he doubted her answer, but because asking had never been easy for him, and he had done it anyway. She took a breath of cold October air. Yes, she said. He nodded once, the way he processed things that mattered completely without performance. Then, good. That's all, she said. Good. What else, he said, and there was something in his voice that was so genuinely Caleb, so precise and so warm and so entirely itself, that she started laughing, the real kind, the kind that arrived without management or calculation. He looked at her with the open, unguarded look, and something moved in his face that was pure and simple, and did not need a name. Good, he said again, and he was smiling. They were married on a Saturday in November. Reverend Moore performed the ceremony in the Red Hollow Church, and the building was full in the way that buildings are full when a community has decided that something is worth showing up for. Mrs. Cooper was in the 3rd row. Finch was in the 5th, looking like a man who had arrived at his opinions belatedly, but had arrived at them fully. Mrs. Patton was in the front row with her upright posture and her direct gaze, and she had brought her husband's Bible, and she held it in her lap like the presence of someone she missed. Ed stood at the back in his best coat with his hat in his hands, and an expression that said he was not going to feel anything demonstrative about this, and had been feeling things demonstratively about it since he'd heard the news. Billy sat beside him, barely managing his own face. Rosa sat in the 2nd row and watched everything with those direct, assessing eyes, and when Evelyn and Caleb said what they were required to say to each other in front of Reverend Moore and the full congregation of Red Hollow. Rosa's expression held something that was not sentiment. Rosa was not built for sentiment, but was its precise functional equivalent. She had decided a long time ago. She simply allowed it to be visible. Afterward, in the churchyard, Evelyn stood beside her husband. Her actual husband, the legal and official version of the thing they had already been for months, and she received the congratulations of a community that had made its decision about her finally and fully. Samuel Briggs' mother took her hand with both hands and said, he read to his father until the end. Robert went quietly listening to his boy read. Her voice was steady. That was your doing. Evelyn said, that was Samuel's doing. You taught him how, the woman said. Don't minimize it. She didn't. The year turned. Winter came to Montana Territory the way it always did, without negotiation, without the courtesy of a gradual approach, simply arriving one morning as a fact. Evelyn taught through it. She expanded the school term by 4 weeks and filled every one of those weeks, and at the end of the term she had 17 students who could read at their grade level 3 who were reading above it, and Samuel Briggs, who had moved ahead of everyone and was beginning to be a problem in the best possible way, the problem of a child who has outgrown the available material and needs more. She wrote to a teacher's college in the East about curriculum materials. They wrote back. She wrote again. By spring, she had an ongoing correspondence with a woman named Dr. Helen Ward, who ran the college's Western Outreach program, and who, upon reading Evelyn's account of the expanded curriculum at Red Hollow, had called it in her response letter, "Exactly the kind of adaptive teaching this territory needs." She showed the letter to Caleb at supper. He read it with full attention and looked up with the expression she had come to think of as his version of uncomplicated joy, rare, complete, entirely genuine. "That's good," he said. "It's very good," she said. "What will you do with it?" "Keep corresponding," she said. "See where it goes." She paused. Does that work? With everything here?" He looked at her. "Evelyn, are you asking me if I mind you having a professional life?" "I'm asking if the logistics work," he said. "They've always worked. You've been managing both since September." He held her gaze. "This ranch survived for 5 years without you. It can survive a teaching schedule and a correspondence with a doctor in the East." "You're making it sound very straightforward," she said. "It is straightforward," he said. "You're good at what you do, all of what you do. There's no reason to treat it as a conflict." She looked at him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. It's still surprising sometimes." "What is?" "That you exist," she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. "Likewise," he said. 1 year after Evelyn Carter had arrived in Red Hollow with $32 and a worn leather suitcase, Stone Ranch was among the most respected operations in the valley. Not because the land was the best, there was better land further north. Not because the cattle were the finest, there were finer herds, 3 counties east. But because the people who worked it and ran it and made decisions about it had a quality that the valley had learned to recognize and could not entirely explain. They were honest and they were consistent, and they treated the work and the people in it as things that mattered. Ed's bad knee was managed better because Evelyn had quietly researched the matter and found that a particular adjustment to his work schedule reduced the inflammation significantly, and she had mentioned it to him once and then left it alone, and he had made the adjustment without ever acknowledging that he had, which was precisely how she had expected it to go. Billy had taken on more responsibility than his years suggested he was ready for, and had risen to meet it and was beginning to talk to Caleb about the future in the way of a young man who has decided he is part of something and wants to invest in it properly. Rosa managed the household with the same efficient authority she had always had, and had extended Evelyn a partnership in that management that was unspoken but absolute. The 2 women operated the domestic life of the ranch with the complementary precision of people who have figured out each other's strengths and made space for them. Mrs. Patton's case was settled in the spring. Holloway's damages were sufficient to secure her property fully, with enough remaining to cover her expenses for several years. She came to tell them in person, driving herself the 6 miles from her property with the upright carriage of a woman who has been managing her own affairs for 40 years and has not stopped. "I want you to know," she said, sitting on the porch with Evelyn in the May afternoon, "that I was prepared to lose. I had made peace with the possibility." "And now," Evelyn said, "now I am very glad I held on." She looked at the yard of Stone Ranch, the clean order of it, the industry of it, the particular character of a place that knows what it is. "I am glad someone held on with me." On a June evening, exactly 1 year after Evelyn had stumbled on a loose board in a Red Hollow sidewalk, and a stranger had caught her arm, she sat with Caleb on the porch of their ranch and watched the sun go down behind the mountains in the particular way it went down in this part of the territory, slowly, like something reluctant, like it understood there was something worth watching in this valley and didn't want to leave it in the dark. 1 year, she said. 1 year, he said. "Do you think we'd have managed it without each other?" He thought about it honestly the way he thought about everything. "I would have kept the ranch," he said. "I would have fought Holloway. I would have documented the boundary and hired lawyers and prevailed eventually." He paused. "But I would have done it alone. And alone you win the thing, and you go back inside to an empty house, and you go to sleep, and you get up the next day and do it again, and somewhere in that there's a life. He looked at her. Just not much of one. She looked at the mountains. I would have found another teaching post eventually, she said. I would have rebuilt my name. I had enough stubbornness. She paused. But I would have spent the rest of my life being careful, keeping things clean and manageable, and without... She stopped. Without this. Without what specifically? She gestured a small, encompassing gesture that indicated the porch and the ranch and the mountains and him. Without this, she said. He reached over and took her hand. They sat together in the quiet of the evening with the sound of the cattle settling in the far pasture and the last of the day cooling around them. And she thought about the specific path that had led here, every step of it, including the bad ones, including the year in Jefferson City, and the $32, and the bench outside Harmon's general store. She had not chosen those things, but she had chosen what to do with them. And what she had done with them was this. "Do you still have that rule?" she asked. He turned to look at her. "What rule?" he said. "The one about never loving again." He looked at her hand in his. He looked at the mountains. He looked at the ranch that his father had built and that he had kept, and that was now for the first time since Jedediah Stone had broken the first ground here, genuinely fully alive. "I had that rule," he said, "until the day you walked into my life. And now," he looked at her with the open, undefended, completely real look that still a year in a marriage, in a life and arrived with the quality of something new. "Now," he said, "I have better ones." She leaned against his shoulder the way she had leaned on the wagon ride home from Mrs. Patton's, and he put his arm around her the way he had held her in the yard when the letter came, and they sat together on the porch of Stone Ranch while the last light went out of the Montana sky. A cowboy who had promised himself he would never love again. A woman who had only agreed to pretend. A marriage that had started as a lie told to a dangerous man on a sidewalk in a frontier town. And a life, a real, full, imperfect, honest, lasting life that neither of them had been looking for, and both of them had needed with an urgency they hadn't known they carried until the moment it arrived. Some things are arranged, some things are accidental, and some things are both at once planned for, entirely the wrong reasons, entered into under entirely the wrong pretenses, and discovered somewhere in the middle of the living of them to be the most right thing either person had ever done. That was the story they told in Red Hollow, Montana territory for years after. Not the story of a fake marriage, or a land fraud, or a man who had tried to take what didn't belong to him. The story of a woman who arrived with nothing but courage, and a man who had forgotten. He still had something left to give, and the night they stood in a crowded street and told the first true lie that led them without detour directly to the truth. That truth was Stone Ranch. That truth was a classroom full of children learning to read. That truth was a porch and 2 chairs and a hand held in the dark. That truth was the one thing neither of them could have planned, and the one thing neither of them could live without. And it held.